The snow fell through the pines like powdered glass, covering the sleeping forest in a heavy, silent blanket. It is winter in the Ardennes. The trees stand tall and ancient, their branches bowing deeply under the weight of the freshly fallen snow. There is a profound, breathtaking quiet here. It is the kind of silence that settles into your bones, hushing the world, softening every edge, and wrapping the landscape in a fragile, white peace. If you were to walk through these woods in the fading twilight, you would hear only the soft, rhythmic crunch of your own footsteps, and the gentle sigh of the wind moving through the needles of the great evergreens. Nestled within this frozen fairy tale, hidden beneath the snowdrifts and beneath the shadows of the old trees, are men. They are young men, mostly, far from the warmth of their homes, far from the lives they knew before the world shifted beneath their feet. They are huddled in shallow dugouts carved into the frozen earth, or tucked away in the drafty, crumbling corners of abandoned stone barns. They are wrapped in thick wool blankets, their collars pulled up high against the biting cold, their breaths rising into the freezing air like small, fading ghosts. This place, for now, is a sanctuary. They call it a quiet sector. For these weary travelers, this silent forest is a place to catch their breath, a brief, beautiful pause in a long and exhausting journey. The harsh sounds of the world are far away. There is no thunder on the horizon. There is only the snow, falling softly, gently burying the scars of the earth. As the sun dips below the tree line, painting the sky in pale shades of lavender and bruised blue, tiny pinpricks of light begin to flicker across the forest floor. They are candles. Small, precious nubs of wax, shielded from the drafts by cupped hands and dented tin mugs. In the soft, amber glow of these little flames, the faces of the soldiers are illuminated. They are tired faces, lined with a weariness that goes much deeper than the bone. But tonight, in the dancing light of the candles, their expressions are soft. The hard edges of their daily reality melt away, replaced by a quiet, reflective tenderness. In this gentle hour, the men are riding home. Imagine a soldier, sitting on a wooden crate in the corner of a ruined farmhouse. He is blowing on his stiff fingers, trying to coax enough warmth into them to hold a dull pencil. On his knee rests a small pad of crinkled paper. He stares out into the dark, but he does not see the snow, and he does not see the ruined walls around him. He sees a front porch in a small town thousands of miles away. He sees a yellow light shining in a kitchen window. When he touches the pencil to the paper, he does not write of the cold, or the fear, or the unimaginable vastness of the ocean he crossed. He protects the people he loves from the heavy truths of this frozen wood. Instead, his words are small, simple, and overflowing with quiet love. He writes to ask if the old hound dog still sleeps by the stove. He writes to say that he misses the smell of Sunday dinner, the sound of the radio playing in the living room, the way the floorboards creak on the stairs. He promises that he will be home soon, that the worst is over, that he is safe here in the quiet trees. Beside him, another man carefully unfolds a piece of paper that has been read 100 times before. It is a letter from his wife, the creases soft and tearing at the edges from the constant touch of his rough hands. He doesn't need to read the words, he already knows them by heart. But he traces the curves of her handwriting, finding an anchor in the familiar loops and lines. He closes his eyes and inhales, trying to remember the scent of her hair, the exact pitch of her laugh. In the freezing dark of the Ardennes, that fragile piece of paper is a bridge to everything that matters. It is a reminder of who he is, beneath the heavy wool and the dirt. These quiet moments are the true heartbeat of the forest. This is the everyday heroism that goes unrecorded in the great books of history, the quiet resilience of the human spirit, stubbornly keeping love alive in the most desolate of places. As the night deepens, the temperature plummets. The cold here is almost a living thing. It creeps through the seams of their boots, it settles into the wool of their coats. Yet, even in this bitter chill, there is a profound warmth to be found in the small, unspoken kindnesses between the men. You can see it in the way one soldier silently passes a battered canteen of hot Weak coffee to his shivering friend, letting him take the first sip. You can see it in the way a young man wordlessly drapes his own spare blanket over the shoulders of a sleeping comrade, choosing to endure the chill himself so that another might rest just a little easier. They are a brotherhood forged in the quiet cold. They know the intimate cadence of each other's coughs, the specific timbre of each other's sighs in the dark. They have nothing to their names but the clothes on their backs and the memories in their heads, but they share everything they have. A single piece of hard candy is broken carefully in two. A dry pair of socks is offered like a priceless treasure. In a shallow foxhole lined with pine boughs, two men sit shoulder to shoulder, pooling their body heat against the frost. They speak in hushed, reverent whispers, so as not to disturb the profound stillness of the woods. They talk about what they will do when the spring comes. They talk about opening a garage, or going back to school, or finally asking that girl from the bakery to dance. They weave futures out of the thin, freezing air, their voices blending with the rustle of the wind. They believe, with all their weary hearts, that this quiet forest is the waiting room to the rest of their lives. They believe the danger has passed them by. Looking up from their trenches, through the canopy of the evergreens, they can see the stars. The winter sky is breathtakingly clear, a vast, velvety canvas scattered with diamonds. It looks exactly like the sky back home. A young boy from the plains stares up at the constellation of Orion, tracing the familiar shape with his eyes, taking comfort in the knowledge that his mother, standing on her back porch across the world, is looking up at those exact same stars. It is a gentle, invisible thread tying his heart to hers, pulling tight across the curvature of the earth. The forest breathes around them. The heavy branches dip. A clump of snow falls softly from a high bough, landing with a muffled puff on the white ground below. The men pull their collars tighter. They blow out their candles, watching the tiny wisps of smoke curl upward and vanish into the dark. One by one, they close their eyes. They drift into sleep, lulled by the hypnotic silence of the snow and the comforting presence of the men breathing softly beside them. They dream of warm fires. They dream of clean sheets and the sound of familiar laughter. They dream of a morning where they do not have to wake up and lace heavy boots over numb toes. They are entirely at peace. They feel lucky to be here, tucked away in this forgotten, snowy corner of the world. But just beyond the tree line, just miles away through the dense, frozen woods, the darkness is not empty. The silence there is not the silence of rest, but the breathless pause of a held inhalation. Unseen, unheard, and entirely unknown to the sleeping men, a massive, unimaginable storm is gathering. Thousands of shadows are moving beneath the canopy of the night. Steel and iron are creeping over the frost-covered roads. The cold air is waiting to be shattered. But for now, in this single, fleeting hour, the forest remains perfectly still. The young men sleep on, wrapped in their blankets, their letters tucked safely against their chests. The snow continues to fall, gentle and forgiving, dusting their shoulders and covering their tracks. It is a beautiful, deeply peaceful night. It is the last quiet night they will know. The frost glitters in the moonlight, holding the breath of the world in its delicate, icy grasp, waiting for the dawn. In the deepest part of the winter night, just before the dawn, the heavy fog turns every tree into a quiet ghost. The forest is swallowed in a sea of white mist, so thick and heavy that the world seems to end only a few feet in front of you. In the lonely outposts at the very edge of the American line, young men stand in shallow holes dug into the frozen earth, straining their tired eyes against the dark. They are the sentries. They are the watchers in the woods, the ones tasked with keeping their sleeping brothers safe while the rest of the forest slumbers. Imagine one of these boys. He is wrapped in every layer of wool he owns, his helmet pulled low, a woolen scarf wrapped tightly across his face. Only his eyes are visible, and they are stinging from the bitter, biting wind. His feet are numb, mere blocks of ice inside his boots, and he shifts his weight slowly from left to right, trying to coax a memory of warmth back into his toes. The silence around him is absolute. It is the kind of silence that rings in your ears, making you hear the rushing of your own blood, the rhythmic rise and fall of your own breath, puffing out into the frigid air like a tiny, gray cloud. He is terribly alone in the dark. To keep himself awake, to keep the creeping isolation at bay, he thinks of home. He tries to remember the exact melody of a song he heard playing on a diner jukebox on a warm July evening. He tries to recall the smell of his mother's kitchen on a Tuesday morning, the way the sunlight would catch the dust motes dancing in the air. He holds onto these fragile, golden memories like a lifeline, pulling them close to his chest to ward off the paralyzing chill of the Ardennes. And then, the silence breaks. It does not shatter all at once. It begins as a feeling beneath his boots. A subtle, shivering tremor deep within the frozen soil. The boy stops his quiet shifting. He holds his breath. He tilts his head, listening intently to the wind. At first, he thinks it is a trick of the mind. The exhaustion and the cold have a way of playing with your senses, making you see shadows that are not there, making you hear whispers and the rustling of the pine needles. But the tremor grows. It becomes a low, continuous rumble, like the sound of a heavy train moving deep beneath the earth, miles and miles away. The snow resting delicately on the branches above him begins to sift downward, falling like powdered sugar in the dark. Then comes the light. Far out in the invisible distance, beyond the impenetrable wall of fog, the horizon begins to glow. It is a pale, sickly light, flickering in sudden flashes of unnatural yellow and bruised orange. It looks like summer lightning, but there is no warmth in it. The flashes diffuse through the thick mist, painting the snowy canopy in strange, ghostly silhouettes. Seconds later, the sound catches up to the light. It is a muffled, rolling thunder, heavy and suffocating. It sounds as though the sky itself is tearing apart, yet the fog makes everything feel distant, detached, and entirely surreal. The young sentry rubs his eyes with his thick mittens. For a fleeting, merciful moment, he believes he is asleep. He believes he has dozed off standing up, and this is merely a strange, dark dream born of the freezing cold. It cannot be real. This is the quiet sector. This is the place where tired men come to rest. But the tremor in the earth grows violently stronger. The distant thunder becomes a roaring tide, rolling relentlessly closer through the invisible woods. The dream fractures, replaced by a sudden, heart-stopping reality. He scrambles backward out of his snowy trench, his boots slipping on the icy ground. He does not shout. The cold air catches in his lungs, and a quiet terror grips his throat. He runs clumsily through the snowdrifts, pushing aside the heavy, snow-laden branches, rushing back to the ruined stone walls and timber dugouts where his friends are sleeping. He drops to his knees beside a huddle of blankets. He reaches out a trembling hand and shakes the shoulder of the man beneath them. "Wake up," he whispers, his voice cracking, tight with a fear he cannot fully articulate. "Wake up. They're here." The men stir from their deep, peaceful sleep. They open their eyes to a world that has completely changed. Just hours ago, they had fallen asleep to the gentle whisper of falling snow and the comforting thought of a warm fire. Now, the earth is shaking beneath them, and the sky above the trees is flashing with a terrifying, rhythmic fire. There is no panic, only a profound, surreal confusion. They move as if underwater, their minds struggling to bridge the gap between their quiet dreams of home and the sudden, overwhelming nightmare unfolding in the dark. Fingers fumble with frozen laces. Men reach blindly for helmets that are coated in a fresh layer of frost. In the dim, chaotic light, you can see the true measure of these men. You see a soldier whose hands are shaking so violently from adrenaline and cold that he cannot manage the clasp of his coat. Beside him, an older soldier, perhaps only a year or two older in age, but a lifetime older in the ways of this winter world, reaches out. Without a single word, he brushes the young man's shaking hands aside. Gently fastens the coat, and gives him a firm, reassuring pat on the shoulder. Their eyes meet in the gloom. It is a look that says everything the night will not let them speak. I am terrified too. But I am right here with you. They step out of their shelters and into the blinding white mist. The forest is utterly unrecognizable. The familiar paths they walked just yesterday are gone, swallowed by craters and falling timber. The air is thick with the sharp, bitter smell of cordite and the dusty scent of pulverized stone, mingling strangely with the fresh, clean smell of the snow. And then, out of the fog, the shadows appear. They do not come as a roaring wave. They emerge silently from the whiteout, ghostly shapes moving methodically through the trees. They are figures in long, pale coats, blending so perfectly with the winter landscape that they seem to be born directly from the snow itself. The sudden realization that the forest is swarming with strangers is deeply unsettling. The lonely sentries, who just an hour ago felt like the only souls left on earth, now find themselves surrounded by an invisible, creeping tide. It is a quiet, desperate struggle in the dark. The fog is so thick that men become separated from their friends by mere yards, suddenly finding themselves completely alone in a sea of white, spinning around, trying to find a familiar face, a familiar voice calling their name. The world turns upside down. The sanctuary of the quiet forest is shattered. The order is given to fall back, to retreat through the deep, punishing snow. Every step is an agony. The snowdrifts pull at their boots like heavy water. Their lungs burn with the freezing air. They are leaving behind their small comforts, the half-written letters on the wooden crates, the precious stub of a candle, the blankets that still hold the faint warmth of their bodies. They are leaving behind the illusion of safety. In the midst of this chaotic retreat, small moments of profound humanity shine through the gloom. A soldier trips over a hidden root, tumbling face first into the deep powder. From his pocket slips a small, leather-bound photograph. It is a picture of a smiling girl standing by a bicycle, the only tether he has to the world he left behind. Even as the shadows close in through the trees, even as the sky roars above him, he drops to his knees in the snow, frantically digging with his bare, freezing fingers to find it. He will not leave her behind. He cannot. Suddenly, a strong hand grips the collar of his coat, hauling him upright. It is his friend, breathless and wide-eyed, shoving the recovered photograph into the young man's chest pocket. "I've got you," his friend gasps, wrapping an arm around him to keep him steady. "Don't stop walking. Just look at my back and keep walking." They lean on each other, two fragile souls pushing against the colossal storm, their breath mingling in the frozen air. They do not know the grand strategy of generals. They do not know that a massive, historical offensive has just begun, or that the fate of the entire winter war hangs in the balance. In this terrifying, swirling whiteout, their universe has shrunk to the span of a few feet. Their entire world is the icy wind, the heavy snow, and the quiet, desperate need to keep the man next to them alive for one more minute, one more hour. As the morning struggles to break, the sun does not appear. The sky merely shifts from a deep black to a bruised, oppressive shade of charcoal gray. The fog clings stubbornly to the ground, hiding the true scale of the encroaching storm. The men find a new, temporary line along a frozen ridge. They collapse into the snow, their chests heaving, their faces pale and dusted with frost. They look back at the woods they just left, woods that now belong to the shadows. A canteen is passed silently down the line. A shivering hand takes a small sip of the freezing water, and passes it to the next. They sit shoulder to shoulder, pooling what little warmth they have left. The shock is beginning to wear off, replaced by a hollow, sinking dread. They realize, as they look at the gray sky and the endless, rolling drifts of white, that their brief respite is truly over. The quiet before the frost was merely an illusion. The snow begins to fall again, large, heavy flakes drifting lazily down from the gloomy heavens. It lands softly on their helmets and their shoulders, indifferent to their fear, indifferent to the shifting lines of the world. It covers their retreating footprints, erasing the path back to the peace they once knew. They pull their coats tighter. They lower their heads against the wind. They do not speak, for there are no words left to say. They simply sit in the snow, leaning against one another, bracing themselves in the cold, gray dawn, waiting for the shadows in the snow to take their final shape. The long, dark test has begun. The last road out of the forest quietly vanished beneath the drifting snow, sealing the world away. It happened slowly, almost imperceptibly, like a great, heavy door gently swinging shut in an old, dark house. There is no sudden crash, no single moment where the men realize the shape of their reality has changed. Instead, it is a creeping sensation. It is the quiet understanding, passed from whisper to whisper down the snowy line, that the paths leading back to the lives they knew have all been swallowed by the winter. They are cut off. The town of Bastogne, with its crooked little streets and its frosted slate roofs, has become a lonely island in a vast, white sea. Imagine the feeling of a circle drawing tight around you. Beyond the perimeter of the town, beyond the shallow trenches carved into the frozen earth, the woods are thick and silent. But the silence is no longer empty. The men know, with a heavy, sinking certainty in their chests, that the shadows among the pines have joined hands. Every direction they look, north, south, east, and west, there is only the enemy, and the cold, and the endless, falling snow. They are entirely surrounded. The psychological weight of this isolation is heavier than the packs on their backs. It presses down on them from the low, gray sky. It seeps up from the frozen ground. To be surrounded is to feel as though the rest of the earth has simply floated away, leaving you stranded on a fragile, freezing rock. There is no mail coming in. There are no warm meals traveling down the supply roads. There is nowhere to retreat, nowhere to run, and nowhere to hide. There is only the town, the snow, and each other. Inside this closing circle of winter, the temperature continues to drop. The cold becomes a living, breathing presence in the ruins of Bastogne. It slips through the shattered windows of abandoned shops. It creeps down the stone steps of the dark cellars. It is a biting, bone-deep ache that makes joints stiffen and fingers clumsy. In these dark cellars and shallow, snow-filled holes, you will find the true heart of this story. You will find huddled masses of men, clinging to one another for the simplest, most primitive comfort of all, warmth. Picture a dark, vaulted basement beneath a ruined bakery. The air is thick with the scent of damp wool, brick dust, and the faint, ghostly sweetness of flour that hasn't been baked in weeks. In the corner, a group of young men sit pressed tightly together, shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee. They have pooled their meager resources, laying down empty burlap sacks and a few tattered pine boughs to insulate themselves from the freezing stone floor. Over their trembling shoulders, they have draped 3 thin, olive-drab blankets, stitching them together into a single, fragile tent of shared body heat. They do not speak of the Grand War. They do not speak of the forces gathering in the woods outside. Instead, they focus on the gentle, rhythmic rise and fall of the man breathing next to them. When one man shivers, the tremor travels through the group, a shared ripple of human frailty. When one man begins to drift into the dangerous, heavy sleep of hypothermia, the man beside him gently nudges his ribs, whispering his name, coaxing him back to the waking world. "Stay with us," a voice murmurs in the dark, soft and raspy from the dry, cold air. "Just stay awake a little longer. Tell me about your brother's car again. Tell me about the color of the paint." And so, the boy with the numb fingers and the heavy eyelids begins to speak. He talks of a bright, cherry-red convertible parked in a sunny driveway in Ohio. He talks of the smell of warm leather and the sound of the radio catching a summer baseball game. His words are slow and slurred at first, but as he paints the picture, as he pulls the memory from his heart and shares it with the freezing men around him, the darkness of the cellar seems to pull back just an inch. They listen with closed eyes, wrapping his story around themselves like an extra blanket. For a few precious minutes, they are not trapped in a ruined town in the Ardennes. They are riding down a country road in the golden light of a July afternoon. This is the quiet resilience of the human spirit. It is the profound, everyday heroism of a boy offering a gentle memory to save a friend's life. Above ground, the situation is no less desperate. Men stand in their frozen foxholes on the edge of the town, staring out into the blinding white mist. The creeping isolation plays tricks on their minds. The endless white landscape offers no landmarks, no sense of time or distance. They feel as though they are standing on the edge of the world, staring out into the void. A young sentry pulls his scarf up over his cracked lips. He reaches into his breast pocket, his stiff fingers brushing against a folded piece of paper. It is a letter from his mother, received weeks ago, long before the roads were closed. He doesn't take it out to read it. The paper is too fragile, and his hands are too clumsy. But just touching it through the heavy wool of his coat brings a sudden, sharp ache to his throat. He wonders if she knows where he is. He wonders if she is watching the evening news, completely unaware that her son is trapped inside a circle of ice, entirely cut off from the world she inhabits. He swallows hard, blinking back tears that threaten to freeze on his eyelashes, and turns his gaze back to the tree line. There is a profound, aching loneliness in being surrounded. You are so close to thousands of other men, yet you have never felt so entirely alone in the universe. Yet, amid this overwhelming isolation, the men of Bastogne find a way to anchor themselves to their humanity. It is in the small, almost invisible gestures of kindness that their true strength is revealed. It is the medic, exhausted and pale, crawling through the deep snow under the cover of twilight, moving from hole to hole just to check on his boys. He has no medicine left. His supplies are exhausted, his bandages frozen stiff. But he goes anyway. He kneels beside a shivering soldier, takes the boy's frozen hands in his own, and breathes his warm breath over the icy skin. He rubs the boy's knuckles gently, offering a tired, reassuring smile. He has nothing to give but his presence, his touch, and the comforting promise that no one is forgotten in the dark. It is the older sergeant, breaking his last piece of hard ration biscuit into 4 impossibly small pieces, making sure every man in his dugout gets a crumb before he takes his own. It is the shared match, struck carefully in the cupped hollow of 2 pairs of hands, its tiny, sulphurous flare illuminating dirt-smudged faces and exhausted, gentle eyes, before lighting a single, precious cigarette that has passed slowly around the circle. Each man takes a drag, savoring the momentary heat in his lungs, before passing it on with a quiet nod of gratitude. These men have been stripped of everything. They have no warmth, no food, no clear way out. They are trapped in a ruined town, surrounded by an enemy that grows stronger with every passing hour. The sky above them is a heavy, impenetrable gray, denying them any hope of rescue from the air. The circle of winter has closed around them completely, locking them in a frozen cage. But as the night descends on Bastogne, wrapping the shattered roofs and the snowy streets in a deep, velvet darkness, a strange and beautiful thing happens in the cellars and the foxholes. The men do not break. The fear is there, lingering in the shadows, heavy and real. The cold is a constant, agonizing companion. But beneath the fear, and beneath the cold, there is a quiet, stubborn refusal to let go. They look at the man to their left. They look at the man to their right. They realize that they are the only family they have left in this isolated world. They draw closer together. They pull the thin blankets tighter over their shoulders. They listen to the wind howling through the ruins above, a lonely, mournful sound that seems to echo the vast emptiness of the snow. But inside their small, dark circles, there is a beating heart. A soldier begins to hum a soft, slow tune. It is a quiet melody, barely louder than a whisper, drifting through the damp air of the cellar. A moment later, another voice joins in, finding the harmony in the dark. Then another. It is not a song of victory, or a march of war. It is a simple, gentle folk song from home, a melody of green fields and slow rivers, sung by voices that are raspy and tired, yet incredibly tender. The song floats up through the floorboards, drifting out into the freezing night air. It weaves through the falling snow, a delicate thread of human warmth in a world of ice. It is a message to the darkness and to the shadows in the woods. It says, we are still here. We are cold, and we are alone, but we are together. The men close their eyes, leaning their heads against one another's shoulders. They let the gentle hum of the song wash over them, easing the stiffness in their bones, calming the racing of their hearts. They do not know what the dawn will bring. They do not know how long the circle will hold, or if the heavy, gray clouds will ever break. But for tonight, in the deep, silent heart of the encircled town, they find peace in each other. They share their breath, they share their memories, and they share the fragile, flickering hope that somewhere, far beyond the wall of the winter woods, someone knows they are here. Someone is coming. And until that day arrives, they will hold the line. They will keep each other warm. They will endure the circle of winter, together, in the quiet, snowy dark. The soft, rhythmic ticking of an old clock is the loudest sound in the sleeping world. Far from the frozen pines and the shattered, snow-covered streets of Bastogne, there is a room wrapped in the quiet velvet of midnight. It is a room tucked away in a grand, old building, safely behind the lines, shielded from the biting wind and the falling snow. Inside, the air is warm and still, carrying the faint, familiar scents of roasted coffee, old paper, and the sweet, lingering ghost of pipe tobacco. The rest of the headquarters has surrendered to sleep. The aides are resting in their cots, the typists have covered their machines, and the heavy wooden hallways are dark and silent. But in this one room, a single desk lamp casts a warm, golden circle of light against the encroaching shadows. Standing within that gentle pool of light is a man. To the world, he is a towering figure, a legend wrapped in polished brass and unyielding armor. But here, in the deeply private hours of the night, stripped of the roaring crowds and the rumbling tanks, he is simply an older man, standing alone in the quiet. The heavy coat of command rests on his shoulders, but his face, illuminated by the amber glow of the lamp, is lined with a profound, aching weariness. He reaches up with a weathered hand, gently removing his wire-rimmed reading glasses, and rubs his tired eyes. Spread out before him, covering the entirety of a large wooden table, is a map. It is a beautiful, terrible thing. The map is a vast ocean of pale paper, crisscrossed with delicate contour lines, blue ink rivers, and the tiny, clustered dots of ancient European towns. Under the soft light of the lamp, it looks like a fragile piece of parchment, harmless and quiet. But the man standing over it knows the truth. He knows that every inch of that paper represents a world of unimaginable cold, a world of freezing mud and dark, lonely forests. His eyes trace a series of red and blue lines drawn in thick, waxy grease pencil. His gaze travels slowly up the parchment, moving away from his own men, moving north into the dark woods of the Ardennes. His eyes settle on a single, small circle drawn around a town called Bastogne. The circle is closed. He rests his hands on the edge of the table, leaning his weight forward. The silence of the room presses in on him, heavy and thick. He does not just see a circle of wax pencil on a paper map. Through the warm light and the quiet air, he feels the chilling reality of what that circle means. He sees the young boys huddled in the dark cellars, sharing their thin wool blankets. He feels the stinging wind rushing through the ruined streets. He hears the soft, ragged breathing of the wounded waiting in the freezing dark. A folded dispatch rests on the table beside the map. It is a message that arrived just hours ago, a quiet, desperate plea whispering through the wires. The men in that circle are cut off. They are surrounded, swallowed by the winter, and they are running out of time. The burden of command is an invisible, crushing weight, and in this midnight hour, it rests entirely on this one man's heart. There is no one else in the room to share it. There is no one to ask for the answer. The lives of thousands of boys, boys who have mothers waiting on porches across the ocean, boys who carry folded letters in their breast pockets, are resting quietly in the palms of his aging hands. He slowly traces the distance on the map with his index finger. He measures the space between his own sleeping army and the trapped men in the north. To bridge that gap, to break that circle of winter, he will have to do something nearly impossible. He will have to wake his men. His soldiers have been fighting for months. They are exhausted, their uniforms thin and frayed, their boots worn down to the soles. Just this evening, they finally found a moment of rest. They have dug their shallow holes, wrapped themselves in whatever warmth they could find, and drifted into a desperate, heavy slumber. They believe they are facing east. They believe tomorrow will bring the same steady, grinding path they have been walking for weeks. To save the boys in Bastogne, the general knows he must turn this massive, weary machine. He must order hundreds of thousands of exhausted men, asleep in the freezing night, to wake up in the dark. He must tell them to pack their frozen gear, to start the freezing engines of their trucks, and to turn blindly north into the teeth of a massive winter storm. It is a maneuver that defies logic. It is a pivot so sudden and so immense that history says it cannot be done. He closes his eyes, and a deep, sorrowful sigh escapes his lips. The quiet room absorbs the sound. He is a man who loves his soldiers with a fierce, paternal devotion, and the thought of waking them shatters his heart. He imagines a young corporal, deeply asleep in the mud, dreaming of a warm kitchen and a soft bed, only to feel the rough shake of a sergeant's hand on his shoulder in the pitch black. He imagines the confusion, the sudden, biting shock of the cold wind, the agonizing stiffness of frozen joints forced to move. He feels the collective groan of an entire army forced to shoulder its heavy burden just when it thought it could finally rest. He knows they will curse his name in the dark. He knows they will whisper their frustrations to the wind as they lace their icy boots. And he accepts it. He absorbs their imagined anger, pulling it into himself, carrying it as the price of keeping them alive. He opens his eyes and looks back at the map. He looks at the closed circle around Bastogne. The boys in that circle are holding on by a thread. They are looking at the gray sky, waiting for a miracle, trusting that they have not been forgotten. They are holding the line in the snow, depending on the promise that their brothers will come for them. The general stands up straight. The weariness in his face does not vanish, but it is slowly replaced by a profound, quiet resolve. The doubt that flickered in the lonely midnight shadows is swept away by a pure, unyielding love for the men he leads. He knows what they are capable of, even when they do not know it themselves. He knows the immense, bottomless well of resilience that lives in the human heart. He walks slowly to the tall window at the edge of the room. He pulls back the heavy velvet curtain and looks out into the night. The glass is cold against his forehead. Outside, the world is dark, covered in a swirling, relentless flurry of snow. The wind howls softly against the panes, a lonely, mournful sound. In the quiet privacy of the room, he bows his head. He does not speak aloud, but his heart sends a gentle, whispering plea out into the vast, dark universe. He asks for a clearing in the clouds. He asks for the wind to settle. But most of all, he asks for strength. Not for himself, but for the boys in the snow. He asks the quiet night to watch over the young men who are about to wake up and step into the storm. He asks that their boots find solid ground, that their hearts find courage, and that they know, deep in their souls, that they are walking toward their brothers. He stands at the window for a long time, watching the snowflakes fall like tiny, silent stars against the dark glass. The peace of the midnight hour is a heavy, sacred thing. It is the deep breath before the plunge, the final moment of stillness before the world is asked to move. Slowly, he lets the velvet curtain fall back into place, sealing the cold night outside. He walks back to the wooden table and sits down in the sturdy leather chair. He reaches for his pen. The ink is black and permanent. He pulls a blank sheet of paper into the golden light of the lamp. His hand is steady now. The monumental weight of the decision has settled into a quiet, purposeful calm. He begins to write. The scratching of the pen returns, a soft, deliberate sound that fills the silence of the room. With each stroke of the ink, he is shifting the fate of thousands. He is drawing a new path through the snow, a lifeline connecting the warm map room to the freezing cellars of the encircled town. When he is finished, he sets the pen down. He folds the paper carefully, his fingers moving with a gentle, reverent precision. He seals the order that will wake the sleeping army. He reaches out and clicks off the desk lamp. The golden light vanishes, and the room is instantly swallowed by the soft, velvet darkness of the very early morning. The map on the table fades into the shadows, the red and blue lines disappearing into the gloom. The old clock on the wall continues its gentle, rhythmic ticking, indifferent to the monumental shift that has just occurred. The general sits in the dark for a moment longer, listening to the silence. His part is done for now. The invisible gears have been set in motion. The plea for help has been answered. In the frozen fields miles away, the quiet slumber is about to end. The long, weary march to break the circle of winter is about to begin. He closes his eyes in the dark, offering one last, silent thought to the men in the snow, and waits for the dawn. A single breath of freezing air was all it took to shatter the quiet dream of rest. Deep in the winter night, the forest was wrapped in a heavy, velvet slumber. The men had fallen asleep where they dropped, collapsing into shallow trenches and the icy beds of empty supply trucks. They were so incredibly tired. It was a weariness that bypassed the muscles and settled deep into the bones, an exhaustion so profound that the frozen ground felt as soft as a feather bed. They had spent weeks moving, walking, and carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. When they finally closed their eyes, they sank into a dreamless, dark ocean, desperate for just a few hours of peace. But out of the darkness came a sound. It was not the roar of an engine or the sharp crack of thunder. It was something much softer, yet far more heartbreaking. It was the gentle, reluctant whisper of a sergeant, moving like a shadow from foxhole to foxhole. He did not shout. He simply knelt in the snow, reaching out a heavily gloved hand to shake the snow-dusted shoulders of the sleeping boys. "Wake up," he whispered, his voice catching in the freezing air. "Pack it up, boys. We're moving." Imagine the quiet agony of that moment. To be pulled from the warm, merciful oblivion of sleep and thrust back into the biting, unforgiving cold. At first, there is only confusion. The men blink their heavy eyes, their minds swimming in the thick fog of exhaustion. They look up at the sky, hoping to see the pale light of morning, but they find only the oppressive, starless black of midnight. They do not want to move. Every instinct, every fiber of their shivering bodies begs them to stay still, to pull the thin wool blankets back over their heads and disappear. The air is so cold it hurts to breathe, catching in their chests like swallowed glass. But they move. Slowly, with a heartbreaking obedience, the shadows in the snow begin to stir. It is a quiet, groaning resurrection. Men sit up in the dark, their joints popping and aching in protest. They fumble with stiff, uncooperative fingers, trying to tie the frozen laces of their boots. The canvas of their tents and packs has frozen solid, snapping and crinkling like thin sheets of ice as they try to fold it away. There is no anger, only a shared, silent misery. They move like sleepwalkers, driven by a deeply ingrained sense of duty and the gentle, unspoken bond of the men suffering beside them. If a man struggles, if his numb fingers simply cannot work the buckle of his pack, the man next to him reaches over. In the pitch black, without a word, he fastens the strap. They lean on each other, sharing their fleeting warmth, sharing the impossible burden of waking up. As the men rise, the machines must also be coaxed from their slumber. All around the forest, the steel beasts are sleeping beneath heavy coats of frost. The jeeps, the half-tracks, and the massive transport trucks sit perfectly still in the dark, their metal bodies holding the deep chill of the winter air. Waking them is a delicate, frustrating dance. A young driver climbs into the cab of a canvas-covered truck. The seat is as hard as a rock, the steering wheel an unbroken circle of ice. He pulls his scarf up over his nose and turns the key. The engine groans. It is a slow, agonizing, metallic whine, sounding just as tired and reluctant as the men outside. The oil in the engine has thickened in the cold, turning to a slow, stubborn sludge. The driver pumps the pedal gently, whispering softly to the dashboard, treating the heavy machine like a tired old horse. "Come on," he murmurs in the dark. "Just turn over for me. Just once." He tries again. The starter grinds, a high, desperate sound that cuts through the quiet woods. And then, finally, it catches. The engine coughs, sputters, and then settles into a low, rattling rumble. A thick plume of white exhaust blooms from the tailpipe, billowing out into the snowy night like a massive, cloudy sigh. Down the line, one by one, the other engines join the chorus. The quiet forest is slowly filled with the low, throbbing hum of waking steel. The smell of raw gasoline and warm exhaust mixes with the crisp, clean scent of the pine needles. The army is breathing again. But turning this massive tide of steel and men is a monumental task. They are facing the wrong way. They must reverse their course, turning thousands of vehicles on narrow, icy roads surrounded by deep, treacherous ditches. It is a slow, agonizing ballet in the dark. Inside the cab of the truck, the driver grips the freezing wheel. Beside him sits another soldier, his head bobbing slightly as he fights a losing battle against sleep. The cab is bitterly cold. The small heater near the floorboards does almost nothing against the invading chill, offering only a faint whisper of lukewarm air that vanishes before it reaches their knees. Frost begins to form on the inside of the windshield, tracing delicate, fern-like patterns across the glass. The driver reaches up with his thumb, scraping a small, clear circle just big enough to see the road ahead. His eyelids feel like they are made of lead. The hypnotizing rhythm of the engine, the low hum of the tires on the packed snow, and the absolute darkness of the woods conspire to pull him back into sleep. He blinks hard, shaking his head, rolling down the window just an inch to let the agonizingly cold wind slap against his face. He needs to stay awake. He holds the lives of the men sleeping in the back of the truck in his cold, tired hands. "Talk to me," the driver whispers to the passenger beside him. "Keep me awake. Tell me about the diner." The passenger shifts in his stiff seat. He rubs his eyes and takes a slow, shaky breath. He searches his exhausted mind for a memory of warmth, a tether to hold them both to the waking world. "It's on the corner of Main and Elm," the passenger murmurs, his voice soft and raspy. "It's got these bright red leather booths. And a counter made of shiny aluminum. The coffee is always hot. Always. And when you walk in, especially on a Sunday morning, the whole place smells like maple syrup and frying bacon." The driver listens intently, fixing his eyes on the dim, red glow of the taillights of the truck just a few yards ahead of him. That red glow is his entire universe now. He follows it blindly into the swirling snow. "My girl works there," the passenger continues, a faint, weary smile touching his lips. "She wears this white apron. She always saves me the last piece of cherry pie. Puts it on a little white plate. You'd like it there. I'll take you there when this is all over." "I'd like that," the driver whispers back. "I'd really like that." They share these quiet visions in the dark, passing them back and forth over the rumble of the engine. They talk of warm kitchens, of soft dogs sleeping by the hearth, of the smell of rain on a hot summer sidewalk. They wrap themselves in these gentle stories, using them as a shield against the endless, freezing night. As the convoy slowly inches forward, turning north, turning toward the storm, the sheer human willpower required to make this journey becomes profoundly clear. These men are not moving because they want glory. They are not moving because they are brave, though they are braver than they will ever know. They are moving because of the invisible thread that pulls at their hearts. They know why they have been awakened. The whisper has traveled down the line, passed from truck to truck, from freezing breath to freezing breath. They know about the boys trapped in the snow. They know about the circle drawn around the town in the north. Every time a driver's eyes begin to drift shut, every time a soldier walking alongside the trucks feels his knees buckle with fatigue, they think of those boys. They imagine them huddled in the dark cellars, shivering, waiting, looking up at the gray sky. They know that if they stop, if they surrender to the beautiful, tempting embrace of sleep, the men in that circle will be lost. And so, they do not stop. They push the heavy steel machines forward. They put one frozen boot in front of the other. They lean into the biting wind, their heads bowed, their shoulders carrying a weight that cannot be measured. The convoy stretches out for miles, a slow, crawling serpent of dim lights winding its way through the dark, snowy hills. From a distance, it is a beautiful, melancholic sight. The soft red taillights glow like dying embers in the mist. The white exhaust of the trucks creates a rolling fog that dances over the tops of the canvas covers. The sound of the convoy is a low, continuous rumble, a rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat that pulses through the quiet valleys. It is a lullaby of steel and snow. In the back of the transport trucks, packed together like cordwood, the infantrymen sway with the motion of the road. They lean their heads on each other's shoulders, their helmets clicking softly together as the truck hits a bump in the ice. They surrender to the rocking of the vehicle, drifting in and out of a restless, freezing sleep. They dream of the sun. They dream of fires. Up front, the driver keeps his hands locked on the wheel. He stares through the tiny, scraped hole in the frosted glass, following the red light ahead. The snow is falling harder now, big, heavy flakes sweeping across the road, swirling in the dim yellow beams of the headlights. The wind howls softly through the cracks in the doors. He feels a profound, quiet peace settle over him. The decision has been made. The pivot is complete. The exhaustion is still there, an ever-present ache in his bones, but it is no longer the heaviest thing he carries. He is filled with a steady, quiet purpose. He is going to get his brothers. The steel tide continues to roll gently into the dark. The engines grumble, a soothing, continuous purr that lulls the surrounding forest back to sleep. The road ahead is long, and the night is deep, but the wheels are turning. They are leaving the quiet woods behind, flowing north like a slow, dark river beneath the falling snow, driven entirely by the quiet, unbreakable resilience of the human heart. The only sound left in the world was the steady, hypnotic crunch of heavy boots pressing into the frozen earth. The sky above the Ardennes has surrendered its darkness, giving way to a pale, pearlescent gray that offers light, but absolutely no warmth. It is the kind of winter morning that feels suspended in time, wrapped in a thick, freezing mist that clings to the branches of the ancient pines and settles heavily into the valleys. Through this quiet, silver fog, a line of men is moving. They stretch out as far as the eye can see, a slow, winding ribbon of olive drab and frost, walking shoulder to shoulder down a narrow, winding road of solid ice. This is the march. It is not a charge. It is not a rush. It is a slow, methodical, agonizingly beautiful testament to the endurance of the human heart. When you walk for hours in the freezing cold, after having been awake through the deepest part of the night, something strange and quiet happens to your mind. The world around you begins to shrink. The towering trees, the rolling hills, the vastness of the sky, they all fade away. Your entire universe narrows down to the patch of frozen snow resting just beneath your boots, and the gentle, rhythmic swaying of the canvas pack on the back of the man walking directly in front of you. It becomes a pendulum. A metronome of canvas and wool, swinging softly left, then right, then left again. The men fall into a deep, walking trance. Their eyes are half closed against the stinging bite of the wind. Their breathing synchronizes, puffing out into the frigid air in tiny, gray clouds that mingle and vanish into the mist. They are sleepwalking, caught in a delicate space between the heavy anchor of their exhaustion and the quiet, stubborn refusal to stop moving. If you were to stand by the side of the road and watch them pass, you would not hear the clatter of weapons or the booming voices of sergeants. You would hear only the rhythmic, unified crunch of the ice beneath their feet, a sound as steady and natural as the breathing of the forest itself. In the midst of this silent river of men, the smallest gestures become acts of profound love. A soldier walking near the edge of the road reaches a numb, trembling hand into the deep pocket of his heavy coat. His fingers brush against something hard and wrapped in thick paper. It is a ration, a small square of thick chocolate that has frozen completely solid in the night. It takes him a long time to peel the paper back. His hands are too clumsy, too stiff from the cold. But he works at it patiently, his head bowed against the wind, until a small corner is exposed. He does not eat it himself. He gently nudges the elbow of the man walking beside him. The second man turns his head slowly, his eyelashes thick with white frost. Without a single word spoken between them, the first soldier breaks the frozen chocolate in two. It snaps with a sharp, brittle sound that is instantly swallowed by the crunch of their boots. He presses the smaller piece into the open, waiting palm of his friend. They place the chocolate in their mouths, letting it rest on their tongues. It is too cold to chew, so they simply let it slowly, gradually melt. It is not a warm meal by a roaring fire. It will not cure the aching deep inside their bones. But in this quiet, freezing world, that tiny, shared taste of sweetness is a miracle. It is a reminder that they are not just machines built for marching. It is a silent promise, passed from hand to hand. I see you. I know how cold you are. I have almost nothing left, but what I have is yours. As the miles stretch on, the physical toll of the march grows heavier. The cold seeps up through the thick rubber soles of their boots, turning their feet into blocks of heavy wood. Every step requires a conscious, deliberate effort. Sometimes, the exhaustion simply becomes too much. A young boy, barely out of high school, feels his knees begin to buckle. The hypnotic rhythm of the man in front of him has pulled him too far down into sleep. His chin drops to his chest, his eyes flutter shut, and his heavy boots catch on a jagged ridge of ice. He begins to fall, tumbling forward into the soft, white drift beside the road. But he never hits the ground. Before he can fall, the man walking directly behind him steps forward, wrapping a strong, heavy arm under the boy's shoulders, catching him midair. He pulls the young soldier upright, holding him steady against the freezing wind. "I've got you," the older soldier whispers, his voice a soft, raspy comfort near the boy's ear. "I've got you, Tommy. Just lean on me for a minute. Keep your feet moving." The boy blinks, disoriented, staring blankly at the snow. "I'm so tired," he mumbles, his words slurring together. "I just want to sit down for a minute. Just 1 minute." "I know," the older man murmurs gently, never breaking his stride, carrying half the boy's weight as they continue down the road. "I know you are. But we can't sit down here. If we sit down, we'll fall asleep. Tell me about the porch. Tell me about the house in Michigan." It is a familiar game, a lifeline thrown into the dark waters of their fatigue. The boy takes a slow, shaky breath. He closes his eyes and searches for the memory. "It's painted white," the boy whispers, his feet clumsily finding the rhythm of the march once again. "It has a wooden swing on the left side. My dad painted the floorboards green last summer. When it rains, you can sit on the swing and stay completely dry, and the whole yard smells like wet pine needles." "That sounds beautiful," the older man whispers back, easing his grip just slightly as the boy regains his balance. "That sounds like a really good place to be. You just keep thinking about that green floor. You just keep walking toward that porch." They walk like this for miles, bound together by murmured words and shared memories. They build invisible, warm houses out of thin air, finding shelter in the soft cadence of each other's voices. To keep their minds from freezing along with their bodies, many of the men turn to the letters folded safely in their breast pockets. They have read these fragile pieces of paper so many times that the words have worn smooth in their minds. As they walk, they begin to recite the lines to themselves, matching the syllables to the heavy rhythm of their boots. Crunch, pause. Crunch, pause. Dear son. Crunch. The snow here. Crunch. Is falling soft. Crunch. A soldier from a small farming town in the plains repeats his mother's words like a sacred mantra. He pictures her sitting at the kitchen table, the yellow light of the lamp catching the silver in her hair, her pen scratching across the stationery. In her letter, she had complained about the winter drafts in the old farmhouse. She had told him she was knitting him a thick woolen scarf, working on it every evening by the fire. He imagines that scarf. He imagines the rough, warm texture of the dark blue yarn. In his mind, he wraps it around his own freezing neck, pulling it tight against the bitter Ardennes wind. He uses his mother's love as a shield, letting her simple, mundane worries about drafty windows anchor him to the gentle world he left behind. Her words are a soft glowing ember in the center of his chest, keeping his heart beating, keeping his legs moving forward through the deep, white powder. They are all walking toward a destination they cannot see. They do not know the exact coordinates of the town called Bastogne. They do not know the names of the men trapped inside the closing circle of winter. But they know the shape of their suffering. They know what it feels like to be cold, and frightened, and entirely alone in the dark. The deep, unspoken empathy that drives this march is a beautiful thing to behold. These exhausted boys, marching on frozen feet, are giving every last ounce of their fading strength to strangers. They are walking into the teeth of the storm not out of hatred for what is in front of them, but out of a profound, overriding love for what they are trying to save. Every footprint they leave in the snow is a mark of that devotion. If you were to look behind them, you would see the road transformed. What was once a smooth, untouched ribbon of ice is now a deeply textured tapestry of thousands of boot prints, pressed firmly into the earth. It is a long, winding trail of human resilience. As the morning wears on, the pale sky begins to drift down again. Tiny, delicate flakes of snow begin to fall from the gray clouds. They land softly on the men's helmets, dusting their shoulders in a fresh coat of white. The snow falls behind them, gently filling in the deep grooves of their footprints, slowly smoothing the road back into a pristine, undisturbed silence. But the men do not look back. They keep their eyes fixed on the hazy horizon, their heads bowed, their shoulders carrying the impossible weight of the winter. The quiet lullaby of their boots on the ice continues. It is the sound of hope, moving slowly but unstoppably through the frozen forest. They share their warmth, they share their quiet words of comfort, and they share the heavy, beautiful burden of the road. They will not stop. They will walk until the ice breaks, until the sky clears, and until they can reach out their weary hands and bring their brothers home. The frozen road stretches on, a quiet path of grace, carrying them softly into the mist. The sky did not just fall, it sank slowly, like a heavy, velvet lid closing over the frozen world. If you were to stand in the snowy fields of the Ardennes on this quiet winter morning and tilt your head back, you would not see the heavens. You would not see the familiar, comforting arc of a blue horizon, nor would you see the pale, distant warmth of the winter sun. There is only a vast, unbroken ceiling of bruised, slate gray. It is a sky made of heavy, rolling clouds, pulled so impossibly low that it feels as though you could reach up from the tops of the ancient pine trees and brush your fingertips against the damp, freezing fog. This gray canopy is more than just weather. To the men huddled in their shallow holes, and to the exhausted boys marching slowly north up the icy roads, this sky is a profound, physical weight. It presses down upon their shoulders. It traps the bitter cold against the earth. It seals them inside a silent, melancholic room made of snow and shadows. When the world turns this shade of flat, endless gray, something shifts in the human heart. The light casts no shadows. The trees become dark, charcoal smudges against the white hills. Without the sun to mark the passing of the hours, time itself seems to freeze, suspending the men in an eternal, twilight limbo. But the heaviest burden of this sky is not the lack of light. It is the silence. For weeks, these young men have learned to look upward for hope. In the vast, open theater of this winter world, the sky was supposed to be their friend. It was the highway for the silver planes, the beautiful, roaring machines that brought food, blankets, and medicine floating down on brightly colored parachutes. The hum of an aircraft engine was a lullaby, a mechanical promise that they were seen, that they were tethered to the rest of the world, and that help was always right above them. Now, the clouds have shut the door. The thick, impenetrable fog has grounded every plane, silencing the familiar, comforting hum. The sky is perfectly, devastatingly quiet. Imagine a young soldier sitting in a snowbank just outside the perimeter of Bastogne. His knees are pulled tightly to his chest, his hands tucked deep into his armpits to preserve whatever fragile warmth remains. The collar of his coat is turned up against the biting wind. Slowly, he tilts his head back. A single snowflake detaches from the heavy mass of gray above and drifts lazily down, landing on his cheek where it instantly melts against his cold skin. He stares upward into the thick mist, his eyes wide and unblinking. He is listening. He strains his ears against the whistling wind, desperately hoping to catch the faint, high-altitude drone of an engine. He waits for the clouds to part, just for a moment, just enough to let a single ray of golden light break through the gloom. But there is nothing. Only the heavy, swirling fog and the gentle, mocking fall of the snow. A profound, aching loneliness washes over him. It is a feeling of being entirely orphaned by the universe. He is a boy who grew up beneath the vast, wide-open skies of the American West, where the blue stretches out forever and the clouds are nothing more than fluffy, passing ships. He remembers lying on his back in the tall summer grass, feeling the warm sun on his face, watching the swallows dart through the clear air. That sky was a canvas of endless possibility. This sky is a closed door. He lowers his head, resting his chin on his knees. He closes his eyes and takes a slow, trembling breath. He does not cry, for the tears would freeze on his face, but a quiet sorrow settles deep in his chest. He accepts, in this lonely moment, that no one is coming from above. They are entirely on their own, trapped beneath this crushing ceiling of winter. Miles away, inside the ruined walls of the encircled town, the gray light filters weakly through the shattered windows of a stone church. The building has been transformed into a sanctuary for the wounded, a quiet, shadowy place filled with the soft rustle of blankets and the rhythmic, labored breathing of sleeping men. Because the clouds have swallowed the sun, the inside of the church exists in a perpetual, muted dusk. A young medic walks slowly down the center aisle. He looks like a ghost himself, his face pale and drawn, his eyes bruised with an exhaustion that goes beyond sleep. He carries a small, dented tin cup holding a precious handful of water. He stops beside a wooden pew where a soldier is lying still, wrapped in a dark woolen blanket. The medic kneels, carefully lifting the boy's head to offer him a sip. "How does it look out there, Doc?" the wounded boy whispers, his voice barely carrying over the drafty hum of the wind. The medic pauses. He looks up toward the high, arched windows. All he can see is the flat, unyielding gray of the snow clouds pressing against the glass. He knows what the boy is really asking. He is asking if the weather has broken. He is asking if the parachutes with the penicillin and the fresh bandages are finally going to fall. The medic offers a soft, sad smile, brushing a stray lock of hair from the boy's forehead. "Still overcast, buddy," the medic whispers gently. "The clouds are just resting today. They're heavy with snow." The wounded boy gives a small, understanding nod. He doesn't complain. He doesn't panic. He just closes his eyes and sinks a little deeper into the wool blanket. "That's all right," the boy murmurs, his breath forming a tiny cloud in the freezing church. "We can wait. My grandma used to say the best things come right after the rain stops. I guess it's the same for the snow." The medic stays kneeling beside him for a long time, sharing the quiet dark. It is a moment of extraordinary, quiet heroism. The medic has no medicine left to give. He has no magic to offer. All he can do is sit in the gray light, hold the boy's hand, and offer the gentle, steady anchor of his presence. They share the disappointment of the sky, absorbing the weight of the clouds together, finding a fragile warmth in their shared patience. The gray ceiling does not discriminate. It stretches across the entire forest, covering the besieged and the rescuers alike. Out on the frozen roads leading north, the men marching to break the circle are walking beneath the exact same oppressive canopy. They look up at the heavy clouds with a mix of despair and quiet frustration. They know that if the sky would just clear, if the silver planes could just take flight, their agonizing journey would be so much easier. The planes could see the road ahead, they could guide them through the treacherous, snowy valleys. But the sky demands that they do this the hard way. The sky demands that they walk every single inch of the icy road on their own frozen feet. Two soldiers march side by side, their boots crunching in perfect rhythm. Their helmets are pulled low, their shoulders hunched against the damp, creeping chill that falls from the mist. "Do you think it's still up there?" one of them whispers, his voice muffled by the thick woolen scarf wrapped around his face. "What?" his friend asks, keeping his eyes fixed on the boot prints in the snow ahead of him. "The sun," the first boy says, stealing a quick, longing glance upward. "It's been gray for so long. Sometimes I start to think this is just what the world looks like now. Just white and gray, forever." His friend reaches out, gently bumping his shoulder against the boy's arm, a soft, physical reminder that he is not alone in the void. "It's up there," his friend murmurs softly. "It's just hiding. It's letting us do the heavy lifting for a while. You'll see it again. I promise you, you'll see it again. Just keep looking at the ground for now. Just focus on the next step." This is how they survive the psychological crushing of the winter clouds. They become each other's horizon. When the sky offers nothing but a cold, blank stare, they turn inward. They look to the man walking beside them. They find their light in the shared, whispered jokes, in the gentle nudges, in the quiet, stubborn refusal to let the gloom swallow their spirits. In a shallow hole dug beneath the roots of an old oak tree, another soldier is utilizing the fading, gray afternoon light to write a letter. He has a small, stubby pencil and a piece of paper that is soft and frayed at the edges. He rests the paper on his knee, his stiff fingers moving slowly across the page. He does not write about the fear, or the artillery, or the creeping numbness in his toes. He writes to his wife, and he writes about the sky. "My darling," he writes, his letters looping carefully. "The sky here today is the exact color of your favorite wool sweater. The one you wear when we drink tea on the porch in November. It is heavy and thick, and it makes the whole forest feel like a quiet, secret room just for us." He stops and blows on his hands, trying to summon enough warmth to finish the thought. He looks up at the bruised clouds, finding a strange, poetic beauty in their relentless weight. He is choosing to see the gray not as a prison, but as a blanket. He is translating the bitter reality of the Ardennes into a gentle, familiar language that will not frighten the woman he loves. "I miss the sun," he continues, "but I know it is waiting for us. When these clouds finally break, I think it will be the most beautiful morning I have ever seen. And until then, I just close my eyes and picture your face, and it is all the light I need." He folds the letter carefully, slipping it into the breast pocket of his coat, pressing it close to his heart. The sky above him continues to darken, shifting from a pale slate to a deep, bruising charcoal as the evening approaches. The fog thickens, rolling through the pine trees like a slow, quiet river. The silence of the grounded plains remains absolute. The men are entirely alone. But as the night begins to weave its way through the gray, the soldiers do not break. They settle deeper into their blankets, pulling their collars tight. They have accepted the heavy ceiling of winter. They realize that if the heavens will not open to offer them hope, they must simply generate it themselves. The sky has turned gray, sealing them in a frozen, isolated world. But beneath the heavy clouds, hidden in the ruins and the snowy trenches, thousands of quiet, beating hearts continue to glow. They lean on each other, sharing their memories of the sun, weathering the dark, and waiting, with infinite, beautiful patience, for the sky to finally clear. Even in the deepest shadows of a broken world, there is always a quiet light burning. The wind outside the ruined walls of Bastogne is a restless, howling thing, endlessly scraping against the shattered slate roofs and whistling through the empty, frozen streets. But if you were to step off those snow-covered cobblestones and descend the worn stone steps into the cavernous cellar of the old cathedral, you would find that the howling of the winter is left behind. Down here, the air is thick, hushed, and profoundly still. It smells of ancient dust, damp wool, and the sweet, heavy scent of melting candle wax. This is the hospital in the ruins. It is not a place of stark white walls and shining steel. It is a sanctuary carved out of the darkness, a sacred, quiet space where the machinery of the war is entirely forgotten, replaced by the soft, unyielding power of human tenderness. The vaulted ceiling arches high above, disappearing into the velvet gloom, but down on the floor, the darkness is gently pushed away by the glow of 100 tiny flames. Small white candles, salvaged from the church above and the abandoned homes nearby, are placed on every available surface. They rest on fallen stones, on wooden crates, and in cracked ceramic saucers. Their golden light dances and flickers, casting long, soft shadows against the ancient masonry. It is a warm, amber light, a light that smooths the hard edges of the world and paints the faces of the sleeping men in shades of gentle grace. Laid out across the cold stone floor, resting on thin layers of straw and wrapped in whatever olive-drab blankets could be found, are the boys who have fallen in the snow. They are arranged in neat, quiet rows, sleeping shoulder to shoulder. They are so incredibly tired. Their uniforms are damp and heavy, their faces smudged with the gray ash and dirt of the winter woods. But here, in this candlelit haven, they are safe. The heavy burden of the front line has been lifted from their shivering shoulders. They have surrendered to the deep, healing pull of rest. Moving quietly among them, stepping lightly so as not to disturb their slumber, are the healers. They are young medics, boys barely older than the soldiers they are tending to, yet their eyes hold a profound, ancient weariness. They have been awake for days. Their own uniforms are stained and frayed, their shoulders slumping with an exhaustion so deep it settles into their very bones. If you were to look inside their canvas medical bags, you would find almost nothing left. The clean white bandages are gone. The small glass vials of medicine are empty. The tools they relied upon to save lives have all been used up in the relentless tide of the winter siege. But a healer does not stop simply because his bag is empty. When the medicine runs out, they give the only thing they have left to offer. They give themselves. Watch one of these young medics as he moves down the row. He crouches beside a soldier who is shivering beneath a thin wool blanket, lost in the restless grip of a fever. The medic does not have a pill to bring down the heat. He does not have a warm fire to offer. Instead, he reaches out with a bare, calloused hand and gently rests his palm against the boy's burning forehead. It is a simple, primitive gesture, but in the freezing dark of the cellar, it is a miracle. It is the tether that pulls the boy back from the terrifying edge of his fevered dream. The medic murmurs softly, his voice a low, soothing rumble, quieter than a whisper. "I'm right here," the medic breathes, brushing a damp lock of hair from the boy's brow. "You're safe now. You're inside. Just listen to my voice. Just rest." The shivering boy slowly opens his eyes, blinking against the amber light. He sees the tired, kind face of the medic hovering above him, haloed by the glow of a nearby candle. A slow, heavy exhale escapes the boy's lips, a physical release of the fear he had been carrying. He closes his eyes again, his breathing gradually slowing, sinking with the calm, steady presence of the hand resting on his forehead. The medic stays beside him for a long, quiet time, simply sitting in the dark, offering his own quiet strength as a bridge over troubled waters. But the medics are not alone in this dark cathedral of care. Moving through the shadows, carrying small tin basins of water and folded pieces of cloth, are the women of the town. They are the mothers, the sisters, and the grandmothers of Bastogne, ordinary people whose lives were suddenly swallowed by the storm. They could have hidden in their own dark cellars, waiting in terror for the siege to end. But when they saw the young boys being carried in from the snow, their hearts overrode their fear. They wear heavy woolen shawls pulled tightly over their shoulders, their steps silent on the stone floor. They do not wear uniforms, and they do not speak the same language as the young men lying on the straw. But compassion needs no translation. Imagine a Belgian woman, her hair streaked with silver, kneeling beside a young soldier from a faraway farm in the American Midwest. The boy is caught in a hazy twilight of pain and homesickness. He tosses his head, whispering fragmented words about a porch swing and a dog named Buster, his voice cracking with the desperate need for his mother. The woman cannot understand his words, but she understands his sorrow perfectly. She dips a torn strip of clean linen into her basin of water she carefully melted from the snow outside over a tiny, hidden stove. She wrings out the cloth and begins to gently, meticulously wash the young man's face. She wipes away the dark soot. She cleans the frost from his cheeks. Her touch is as light as a falling leaf, carrying the gentle, practiced rhythm of a mother tending to her own child. As she works, she begins to hum. It is a slow, mournful, deeply beautiful lullaby, an old folk melody from the Ardennes that has been sung in these valleys for hundreds of years. The notes drift softly through the damp air, weaving through the flickering shadows, a delicate ribbon of sound that wraps around the sleeping men. The young soldier stops his restless turning. He leans into the cool, damp cloth, letting the beautiful, foreign melody wash over him. In his feverish mind, the stone ceiling of the cellar melts away, replaced by the wooden beams of his own bedroom back home. The humming becomes the sound of the wind in the cornfields. For a few precious, golden minutes, he is not a frightened soldier in a surrounded town. He is just a boy, safe and loved, resting in the quiet dark. Further down the aisle, tucked away in a shadowed corner of the room, another kind of healing is taking place. Two soldiers lie on stretchers placed so closely together that their elbows touch. Between them sits a single, half-melted candle, its flame struggling against a faint draft. One of the boys has a bandage wrapped heavily over his eyes, sealing him in a permanent, terrifying night. His hands rest nervously on his chest, his fingers plucking anxiously at the edge of his wool blanket. His friend, lying beside him with his arm resting in a makeshift sling, watches him with a quiet, aching empathy. He knows the fear of the dark. He knows how the silence can suddenly feel like an ocean closing in over your head. With his good hand, the sighted boy reaches into his breast pocket and carefully unfolds a piece of paper. It is a letter from his own sweetheart, creased and worn from 100 readings. He smooths it out on his chest, angling it toward the dim light of the candle. "Hey," he whispers, his voice cutting gently through the quiet of the cellar. "I got a letter today. From your folks. Do you want me to read it to you?" The blind boy stops his anxious plucking. He turns his head slightly toward the sound of his friend's voice, a small, fragile knot of hope forming in his throat. "Yeah," he breathes softly. "Yeah, please." The sighted boy looks down at the letter in his hand. It is not from his friend's parents. It is his own letter, filled with words meant only for him. But in the dim, golden light of the hospital, he makes a profound, quiet sacrifice. He gives away his own piece of home. "All right," he whispers, clearing his throat softly. He looks at the elegant handwriting of his sweetheart, but he speaks different words. He builds a beautiful lie out of thin air, crafting a story designed entirely to bring peace to the boy beside him. "Your mother says hello," he reads, his voice slow and comforting. "She says it snowed back home last week, a real heavy one, and the pine trees out back are completely covered. She says your dad finally fixed that squeaky hinge on the front door. And she baked a pie yesterday. Apple. She says she left it on the windowsill to cool, and she's saving a slice just for you. The blind boy exhales, a long, shuddering sigh of pure relief. A faint, beautiful smile touches the corners of his lips. He can smell the cinnamon. He can see the white snow on the familiar branches. The terrifying darkness of his injury is suddenly filled with the warm, golden light of a kitchen he knows by heart. She really said that, he whispers, his voice thick with emotion. Word for word, his friend replies, carefully folding his own letter and tucking it back into his pocket over his heart. He reaches out across the small gap between the stretchers and rests his hand over his friend's. She says they love you. She says they're just waiting for you to come walking up that path. Thank you, the blind boy murmurs, his hand relaxing beneath his friend's gentle grip. Thank you for reading it to me. Anytime, buddy, the boy whispers back. Anytime. They lie there in the soft candlelight, their hands resting together, tethered by a beautiful fiction that is more powerful than any medicine. It is a moment of breathtaking, everyday heroism, a quiet rescue performed in the shadows, asking for no medals and seeking no praise. As the night deepens, the hospital settles into a profound, hypnotic quiet. The howling of the wind outside seems to fade even further away, becoming nothing more than a soft, distant hum. The flickering candles burn low, their wax pooling softly in the saucers, casting a final, warm glow over the vaulted stones. A weary medic sits on the bottom step of the stone staircase, his head resting against the cold wall. He looks out over the sea of sleeping boys. He listens to the rhythmic, collective breathing that fills the room, a gentle rise and fall that sounds like the shore of a quiet ocean. He feels the heavy, invisible weight of the dark world pressing down upon the town, but sitting here, surrounded by the soft murmurs of the nurses and the quiet companionship of the wounded, he feels something else, too. He feels an unbreakable, stubborn warmth. The circle of winter outside is fierce and terrifying. It has taken their warmth, their food, and their safety. But it has not breached these stone walls. Down here, in the damp and the dark, the human spirit is quietly holding the line. Love is moving softly in the shadows, carrying a basin of warm water, humming an old melody, and reading a fabricated letter by the light of a fading candle. The medic closes his eyes, letting the absolute peace of the room wash over his exhausted mind. He lets his breathing sync with the gentle rhythm of the sleeping boys. The hospital in the ruins is a testament to the quiet, enduring grace of the human heart. It is a promise, whispered in the dark, that even when the entire world shatters into cold and frightening pieces, there will always be gentle hands ready to carefully, tenderly put it back together. The candles flicker, casting one last golden breath of light against the ancient stones, keeping the dark at bay, and allowing the boys to sleep, dreaming of the sun, entirely safe, and entirely loved. Sometimes, the smallest, quietest word can hold back the weight of 1,000 storms. In the dead of winter, when the fog is so thick it feels like a physical weight against your chest, the world becomes a place of secrets. Around the perimeter of Bastogne, the men are tucked into the earth, their foxholes lined with frozen pine needles and the tattered remains of empty supply sacks. The silence here is heavy, broken only by the occasional, distant thud of something heavy or the lonely whistle of a wind that never seems to tire. To be surrounded is to feel the world shrinking until it is only as large as the few feet of frozen ground you stand upon. In this deep, monochromatic world of gray and white, a message began to travel. It didn't arrive with the roar of a trumpet or the flash of a flare. It moved softly, like a ripple on a dark pond, passed from one shivering soldier to the next in the hushed, raspy tones of men who had forgotten the sound of their own normal voices. It was a single word, born in a moment of weary, stubborn clarity behind the stone walls of a commander's headquarters. Imagine a young private, his hands shoved deep into his armpits, his chin resting on the frozen rim of his foxhole. He is staring into the mist, watching the way the snowflakes dance in the dim light. He feels small. He feels forgotten. He wonders if the people back home can feel the chill that has settled into his soul. Then, a shadow crawls toward him, his sergeant, moving low through the snow. The sergeant leans in close, his breath a warm, fleeting cloud against the freezing air. "Did you hear?" the sergeant whispers, a tiny, tired glint of something like a smile touching his eyes. "The Germans asked us to surrender. They sent a formal note in the middle of the woods. And the general, he just looked at it. He didn't give them a speech. He didn't give them a map. He just wrote one word, nuts." The private blinks. He lets the word hang in the air between them. It is such a simple word. A word from a kitchen table back home. A word used when a baseball game is lost in the ninth inning, or when a car won't start on a rainy morning. It isn't a word of war, it is a word of home. It is a stubborn, playful, quintessentially human refusal to take a dark situation too seriously. In the foxhole, the private feels a strange, slow warmth begin to spread through his chest. It doesn't melt the ice on his boots, and it doesn't fill his empty stomach, but it does something far more important. It reminds him of who he is. He isn't just a target in the snow. He is a boy from a place where people don't give up just because the weather turned sour. He is part of something that cannot be broken by a circle of steel. As the sergeant crawls away to the next hole, the private repeats the word to himself, very softly. Nuts. He finds himself chuckling, a low, dry sound that feels foreign in the freezing silence. It is a tiny spark of defiance, a quiet no whispered back at the vast, intimidating darkness of the forest. This word traveled through the town like a secret shared between brothers. It drifted down into the dark cellars where the wounded lay on their straw beds. It reached the medics who were tearing up their last clean shirts to make bandages. In the flickering candlelight of the makeshift hospitals, the story was told and retold. It wasn't heard as a boastful shout, but as a gentle, reassuring hand on a shoulder. It meant that the men at the top were just as stubborn as the men in the mud. It meant that they were all still in this together, locked in a shared, quiet pact of resilience. Think of the men in the ruins of the town square, huddled behind a crumbled stone wall. They are sharing a single, dented tin of cold beans, passing it around with a sense of ceremony that belies their surroundings. One of them tells the story of the message. They don't cheer. They don't wave their helmets. Instead, they sit a little straighter. They pull their blankets a little tighter. The word acts as a glue, mending the frayed edges of their spirit. Nuts, one of them says, leaning back against the cold stone. Just nuts. I like that. It sounds like something my old man would say when the roof leaked. They laugh softly, a group of tired boys finding a moment of grace in a word that belongs to the world of porches and Sunday dinners. In that moment, the enemy in the woods feels a little less like a faceless monster and a little more like a nuisance that will eventually have to be dealt with. The fear doesn't vanish. Fear is a constant companion in the Ardennes, but it loses its sharp, jagged edge. It becomes manageable. The beauty of this defiance lay in its simplicity. It wasn't a grand historical declaration intended for the books. It was a human response to an impossible demand. It was the sound of a heart that refused to be intimidated by the scale of the winter. By choosing a word so mundane, so ordinary, the commander had reached out and touched every single soldier in the perimeter. He had given them a piece of home to hold on to. As the night deepened and the snow began to fall with a renewed, heavy silence, the nuts reply became a silent mantra. It was whispered into the wool of scarves. It was thought of while staring at the gray, unyielding sky. It was the quiet light that burned in the center of the circle when every other light had been extinguished. In a lonely outpost on the southern edge of the town, a soldier sits by himself. He is thinking of his mother's kitchen, the way the linoleum was worn near the sink, the way the clock over the stove hummed. He feels the isolation of the siege pressing in on him, the terrifying thought that the road back to that kitchen might be closed forever. But then he remembers the word. He remembers the quiet, stubborn ripple that moved through the line that afternoon. He reaches out and touches the cold steel of his rifle. He adjusts his helmet. He feels a quiet, steady resolve settle into his bones, more enduring than the frost. He isn't just waiting for the end. He is holding a place. He is a part of a refusal that stretches all the way around the town. The whispers in the dark that night were not of despair. They were the sounds of men anchoring themselves to their humanity. They were the sounds of a shared secret that the winter could not understand. The enemy saw a trapped army, shivering and low on supplies. But beneath the snow and the shadows, there was a different reality. There was a community of souls who had decided that a single, simple word was enough to bridge the gap between their foxholes and their dreams. The snow continued to drift down, covering the frozen roads and the shattered roofs. The fog remained, a thick and silent wall. But inside the circle of Bastogne, the atmosphere had shifted. The men leaned into the wind, their breath rising in steady, rhythmic clouds. They were tired, they were hungry, and they were cold. But they were not defeated. The word nuts lived in the spaces between their heartbeats. It was a lullaby of defiance, a whispered promise that they would remain exactly where they were until the sky cleared and the world opened up again. In the quiet, snowy dark, 1,000 young men held onto that word like a warm stone in their pockets, finding the strength to endure one more hour, one more night, one more breath. The storm was vast, but the human spirit, in all its simple, stubborn glory, was vaster still. The snow fell with a peculiar, hallowed grace, as if even the sky knew the date on the calendar. It is Christmas morning in the Ardennes, and the world is a study in white and gray. There is a stillness here that feels different from the silence of the days before. It is a heavy, sacred quiet, a pause in the breath of history. Inside the frozen earth, in the jagged rectangular wounds they call foxholes, the men wake to a morning that should be filled with the scent of pine needles and cinnamon, the sound of tearing paper, and the warmth of a kitchen fire. Instead, they wake to the scent of damp wool and frozen dirt, and a silence so profound it rings in their ears. Imagine a young man named Arthur, lying in a hole he carved out of the frost 3 days ago. He is wrapped in a tattered blanket that has become stiff with his own frozen breath. As he opens his eyes, he sees the pine trees above him draped in heavy, crystalline robes of white. For a fleeting, beautiful second, he isn't a soldier in a besieged forest. He is a boy in Vermont, looking out his bedroom window at the first snow of the year. He half expects to hear his mother calling him down for breakfast, the clatter of plates, the smell of wood smoke. But then the cold hits him, a sharp, stinging reminder of where he is. He sits up slowly, his joints creaking like the old trees surrounding him. He reaches into his pocket and feels the small, rectangular shape of a letter from home. He doesn't need to open it, he knows the words by heart. His sister wrote about the tree they picked out, how it leaned a little to the left, and how they decorated it with the same silver tinsel they've used since he was 5. He holds the paper through the wool of his coat, and for a moment, the paper feels warm. This is Christmas in a circle. There are no bells, no choirs, and no brightly wrapped boxes. But there is a different kind of gift-giving happening beneath the canopy of the pines. A few yards away, in another hole, 2 friends are sitting shoulder to shoulder, cooling the meager heat of their bodies. One of them, a boy with a constant, tired smile, reaches into his webbing and pulls out a single, crumpled cigarette. It is his last one. He has been saving it for weeks, tucked away for a moment when the world felt too heavy to carry. He looks at his friend, whose hands are shaking so violently he can barely hold his rifle. Without a word, the boy strikes a match, shielding the tiny, flickering flame with his cupped hands as if it were the most precious light in the universe. He lights the cigarette, takes one long, slow pull, and then passes it to his friend. They sit in the blue shadows of the morning, passing that single ember back and forth. They don't talk about the war. They don't talk about the lines on the map. They talk about the taste of the smoke and the way the light catches the falling flakes. In that shared cigarette, there is a communion more profound than any cathedral service. It is a quiet declaration that they are still human, still friends, still alive. In the makeshift hospitals back in the ruins of the town, the morning is marked by a different kind of caroling. A young medic, his eyes rimmed with red from days without sleep, moves among the rows of wounded. He has no morphine left to give, no way to truly dull the ache of the cold or the sting of the wounds. But as he moves, he begins to hum. It starts as a low vibration in his chest, a melody almost lost to the wind. It is silent night. Slowly, other voices join in. They are raspy, thin, and weary voices, some cracked with pain, others softened by memory. The song drifts through the drafty, dark cellar, rising like incense toward the stone ceiling. For those few minutes, the pain seems to recede, replaced by the ghost of a shared memory. They aren't soldiers from different states or different backgrounds, they are just men, singing a lullaby to themselves in the dark. A Belgian nurse, her hand stained and her heart heavy, stops her work for a moment and leans her head against a cold stone pillar, closing her eyes. She knows the melody. It is the same one her mother sang to her in a house that no longer stands. The music is a bridge that spans the ocean, the forest, and the fear. As the pale sun struggles to climb above the gray horizon, the men in the foxholes begin their Christmas feast. There is no roasted turkey, no cranberry sauce, no bowls of mashed potatoes steaming in the center of a linen-covered table. Their feast is a cold tin of rations, perhaps a small piece of chocolate hoarded since the last supply drop, and a cup of melted snow. But as they eat, they dream. Imagine a soldier sitting in the mud, staring at a small twig of holly he found and stuck into the side of his trench. As he chews his dry biscuit, he is actually tasting his grandmother's stuffing. He can see the steam rising from the gravy boat. He can hear the laughter of his cousins in the next room and the soft clinking of silverware. He visualizes the way the light from the fireplace dances on the rug. These dreams are not just fantasies, they are armor. They are the things that keep the frost from reaching the very center of their souls. They eat their cold meals with a strange, quiet dignity, honoring the tables they left behind. Even the landscape seems to offer a moment of grace. The Ardennes, usually so dark and forbidding, takes on a surreal beauty on this day. The way the frost clings to every needle of the pines, the way the light reflects off the untouched drifts in the clearings, it looks like a world made of glass and lace. A soldier looks out over the white expanse and realizes that, despite the danger, it is the most beautiful Christmas he has ever seen. It is a deadly beauty, yes, but it is beauty nonetheless. He finds a small measure of peace in the aesthetics of the winter, a reminder that there is still order and grace in the natural world, even when the human world feels like it is falling apart. In one outpost, a young soldier finds a small, discarded piece of cardboard from a ration box. With a stubby pencil, he begins to draw. He doesn't draw the trees or the tanks. He draws a fireplace with stockings hanging from the mantel. He writes the names of his brothers and sisters on the stockings. He props the cardboard up against a frozen clod of dirt at the bottom of his hole. It is his own private chapel, his own little piece of the holiday. Throughout the day, his eyes keep drifting back to that drawing. It is a focal point for his hope, a tiny, hand-drawn window back to the life he is fighting to return to. There are moments of quiet, unexpected heroism that never make the headlines. The sergeant who gives his extra pair of dry socks, the most valuable thing in the forest, to the youngest private in his squad because he saw the boy crying from the cold. The man who crawls through the snow to a neighboring foxhole just to say Merry Christmas and check on a friend he hasn't seen since the fog rolled in. These are the sparks of light that keep the darkness of the siege at bay. They are the true meaning of the season, stripped of the tinsel and the noise, reduced to its purest form, the simple, sacrificial love of one human being for another. As the afternoon shadows begin to lengthen, stretching like long blue fingers across the snow, a heavy, contemplative mood settles over the lines. The men know that the day is ending. They know that the reprieve of the spirit must eventually give way to the reality of the night. But they linger in the feeling of the day as long as they can. In a quiet corner of the woods, a group of men gather in a circle, standing knee-deep in a drift. They don't have a priest, and they don't have a Bible. But one man remembers a few verses from the Christmas story. He speaks them softly, his voice barely a whisper, yet it carries in the crisp, cold air. "Peace on earth, goodwill toward men," he says. The words feel strange in a place filled with steel and iron. They feel fragile, like the snowflakes landing on his wool coat. But they also feel ancient and unshakable. The men bow their heads. They think of their families, their friends, and the world they hope to build when the snow melts and the guns go silent. They pray not for victory, but for a way home. They pray for the strength to endure one more night of the winter. The night begins to fall, a deep, velvet blue that swallows the white forest. The stars come out, cold and brilliant, looking down on the thousands of small, dark holes where men are huddled. Inside those holes, the letters are tucked back into pockets. The drawings are put away. The last of the hoarded chocolate is gone. But something remains. A soldier lies back down in his frozen bed. He pulls his coat up to his chin. He looks up at the stars and whispers, "Merry Christmas, Ma." Merry Christmas, everyone. He imagines the wish traveling on the wind, floating over the pines, crossing the dark mountains and the cold sea, until it reaches a quiet house on a quiet street where a candle is burning in the window just for him. He closes his eyes. He is cold, he is hungry, and he is miles from home. But for this one day, the circle of winter was not just a prison, it was a sanctuary for his heart. He drifts into a restless sleep, lulled by the rhythmic breathing of his friend beside him and the soft, eternal whisper of the falling snow. Christmas in the foxholes has come to an end, but the light it kindled in the dark will burn on, a steady, quiet flame to guide them through the shadows yet to come. The gray ceiling of the world finally began to fray at the edges, revealing a sliver of impossible, brilliant blue. For days, the men of Bastogne had lived in a world without a horizon. The sky had been a heavy, suffocating blanket of slate, pressing the cold into their bones and the silence into their hearts. They had looked upward so many times, searching for a sign, only to be met by the relentless, swirling white of the fog. But on this morning, the wind began to change its tune. It no longer moaned with the weight of the ice. Instead, it began to whisper, a soft and steady breath that pushed the heavy curtains of the mist aside. Imagine a young soldier named Thomas, standing in his shallow foxhole on the eastern edge of the woods. His eyes are red from the sting of the frost, and his spirit is weary from the long, dark watch of the night. He is staring at a patch of fog between two ancient pines, expecting it to swallow the world again. But then, a miracle happens. The thick, gray wall shivers. It thins, becoming translucent like fine lace, and then it simply vanishes. A single, golden beam of sunlight breaks through. It strikes the snow just a few feet from his trench, turning the dull white powder into a field of shimmering diamonds. Thomas watches, breathless, as the light crawls toward him. It reaches the rim of his foxhole, climbs over the frozen dirt, and finally settles on his hands. He hasn't felt the warmth of the sun in what feels like a lifetime. It is a faint, gentle heat, but to Thomas, it feels like the touch of a loved one. He closes his eyes, tilts his head back, and lets the light bathe his face. For the first time in many days, the tightness in his chest begins to loosen. The world is no longer a prison of gray. The heavens have finally opened their doors. All around the perimeter, the word spreads not through shouts, but through a collective, indrawn breath of wonder. Men crawl out of their snowy burrows, blinking like creatures emerging from a long hibernation. They look up at the sky, and there it is, a vast, sapphire dome, stretching out forever, clean and cold and beautiful. The oppressive weight that had been sitting on their shoulders for a week seems to lift, evaporating into the crisp morning air. And then, a new sound begins to drift over the hills. At first, it is so faint that the men think it might be the wind playing tricks again. It is a low, rhythmic thrumming, a deep vibration that moves through the soles of their boots before it ever reaches their ears. But the sound grows. It swells into a steady, mechanical heartbeat, a powerful drone that shakes the remaining snow from the branches of the pines. The silver birds are coming. From over the horizon, the great, heavy-bellied planes appear, their wings catching the morning sun and reflecting it back in brilliant flashes of light. They move with a slow, majestic grace, cutting through the blue sky like ships sailing on a calm ocean. To the men on the ground, these are not just machines, they are messengers from another world. They are the proof that they have not been forgotten, that the thread connecting them to the rest of humanity has not been snapped by the winter. As the planes pass over the town, the sky suddenly erupts in a riot of color. It is a sight so beautiful that many of the men find themselves weeping, the tears freezing on their cheeks as they laugh. From the bellies of the silver birds, hundreds of parachutes bloom at once. They are not the drab, olive green of the forest. They are vibrant reds, sunny yellows, deep blues, and crisp whites, silk flowers blossoming in a winter garden. They drift down slowly, dancing on the gentle breeze, a kaleidoscope of hope falling through the frozen air. Imagine the relief in the dark cellars of the makeshift hospitals. A young medic, his face gray with exhaustion, hears the roar of the engines and runs to the small, frosted window at the top of the stone stairs. He watches as the red and yellow silks begin to settle over the snowy fields. He turns back to the wounded boys lying on their straw beds, his voice trembling with a joy he can barely contain. "They're here," he whispers, his eyes bright with tears. "The sky is full of colors, boys. Everything we need is falling from the clouds." A wounded soldier, his hand clutched in a thin wool blanket, looks up and smiles. He doesn't ask for medicine, and he doesn't ask for food. He just asks to see a piece of the silk. He wants to touch something that came from the sun-drenched sky, something that isn't made of dirt or iron. Out in the fields, the recovery begins. It is not a frantic scramble, but a rhythmic, joyful movement. Men move through the deep drifts, their boots crunching in the sun-kissed snow, toward the spots where the colorful flowers have landed. They gather the silk in their arms, the fabric feeling impossibly soft and smooth against their rough, calloused fingers. The parachutes are like heavy, cold velvet, holding within them the treasures of the world, clean bandages that smell of ivory soap, boxes of chocolate that taste of home, and the precious, life-saving medicine that will turn the tide in the hospitals. But more than the supplies, it is the fact of the drop that nourishes them. Each parachute is a letter from the world outside. It is a message that says, "We see you. We are with you. Hold on just a little longer." A group of soldiers sits in the snow, leaning against a fallen log, sharing a newly arrived tin of peaches. The sun is high now, and the blue of the sky is so deep it feels like you could drown in it. They pass the tin around, savoring the sweet, golden fruit and the thick syrup that tastes like a summer afternoon. They talk in low, relaxed voices, no longer whispering about the shadows in the woods, but about the beauty of the parachutes. "I saw a red one land right on top of that old barn," one boy says, a faint, genuine smile lighting up his face. "It looked like a giant poppy. I never thought I'd be so happy to see the color red." "I'm going to save a piece of the blue silk," another soldier murmurs, his fingers tracing the edge of a discarded parachute. "I'm going to tuck it into the next letter I write to my girl. I want her to know what the sky looked like the day the world opened up again." The psychological shift is profound. The desperation that had been gnawing at the edges of their resolve is replaced by a steady, quiet confidence. The nuts reply from a few days ago now feels anchored in the very earth beneath them. They are no longer just survivors, they are the keepers of the gate, and they know now that the gate will not fall. As the afternoon wears on, the planes disappear back over the horizon, their roar fading into a gentle hum and then into silence. But the sky remains blue. The sun continues its slow, golden descent, painting the snow in shades of rose and lavender. The colorful silks are gathered and brought inside, but their bright spirits linger in the air. In a quiet corner of the perimeter, Thomas sits back in his foxhole. The sunlight has left his trench now, but the memory of its warmth stays with him. He looks at his hands, no longer gray and trembling, but steady in the fading light. He feels a deep, soul-level peace. He knows that the road ahead is still long, and the winter is not yet finished with them. There will be more cold nights and more lonely watches. But the clearing in the clouds has changed everything. He realizes that hope is not a grand, loud thing. It is the color of a red parachute against a white field. It is the taste of a peach in the snow. It is the sight of a single patch of blue in a week of gray. It is the quiet, unbreakable knowledge that no matter how deep the winter, the sun is always there, waiting for the wind to change. The stars begin to peek out, one by one, as the sapphire sky deepens into a velvet midnight. But tonight, the stars do not look cold. They look like tiny, flickering candles, mirrored by the quiet lights beginning to glow again in the windows of the town. The men wrap themselves in their blankets, pulling the colorful pieces of silk close to their hearts. They listen to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the forest, no longer a place of ghosts, but a place of rest. The clearing in the clouds was a gift, a moment of grace that allowed them to breathe again. And as they drift into a deep, peaceful sleep, they carry the colors of the sky in their dreams, knowing that they are seen, knowing that they are loved, and knowing that the dawn will bring another day of light. The circle of winter remains, but the darkness has been broken by the blue, and the blue is all they need to carry them home. The ancient stones of the village did not speak, but they held the weight of 1,000 winters in their cold, gray hearts. Imagine a small cluster of houses nestled in a dip between two snowy ridges. These are homes built of heavy fieldstone, with steep slate roofs that have stood against the winds of the Ardennes for centuries. In any other year, this would be a place of wood smoke and warm cider, of children sliding down the icy lanes and the smell of roasting meats drifting from the chimneys. But today, the village is a hollow shell, draped in a thick, suffocating layer of frost. The windows are like dark, unblinking eyes, and the only sound is the mournful creak of a garden gate swinging back and forth in the bitter breeze. This is the nameless village of silent stones, and it stands directly in the path of the men moving north. The soldiers of the rescue column are so close now that they can almost feel the collective heartbeat of their brothers trapped in Bastogne. They are tired, their faces carved into masks of salt and grit, but the proximity to the goal has given them a second, fragile wind. They move through the deep snow at the edge of the village with a slow, cautious grace. Every step is a deliberate choice. Every breath is a quiet prayer. Among them is a young man named Elias. He is a scout, the one who must walk first into the stillness. As he creeps toward the first stone wall, his heart is a frantic bird fluttering against the cage of his ribs. He is not thinking of maps or grand strategies. He is thinking of the way his father's workshop smelled of cedar shavings. He is thinking of the soft, rhythmic click of his mother's knitting needles. He uses these memories to anchor himself, to keep his hands from shaking as he grips the cold metal of his gear. Fear, in a place like this, is not a loud or screaming thing. It is a quiet, steady companion that sits on your shoulder and whispers in the dark. It is the fear of the unknown shadow in the doorway, the fear of the silence that lasts just a second too long. Elias feels this fear deeply, but he also feels a profound, unspoken love for the men behind him. He knows that if he can just clear this one street, if he can just reach the church at the center of the village, they will be 1 mile closer to the circle. 1 mile. On a map, it is the width of a finger. In the snow, against the silent stones, it is a journey across an ocean. As the column enters the village, the silence is suddenly broken, but not by the sounds of a grand battle. Instead, it is a heavy, rhythmic exchange of weight. The air is filled with the low, guttural growl of engines struggling against the ice and the sharp, snapping sounds of the winter woods. The resistance here is stubborn and hidden. It comes from behind the thick stone walls and from the dark recesses of the cellars. The men do not charge. They do not shout. They simply push. They lean their shoulders against the cold stone of the houses and inch forward, yard by agonizing yard. In the lee of a ruined barn, a veteran soldier named Henry huddles with a group of younger boys. They are all shivering, their lips a pale shade of blue, their breath rising in thick clouds that vanish into the gray sky. Henry looks at their faces and sees the same private terror he felt years ago. He reaches out and gently adjusts the collar of the boy next to him, a small, fatherly gesture that says more than any speech ever could. Just to the next house, Henry whispers, his voice a low, soothing rasp. Don't look at the end of the road. Just look at the next stone. We'll get there together. They move out into the open, their boots slipping on the treacherous ice. Every yard they gain is bought with a heavy, quiet sacrifice. It is the sacrifice of the last bit of warmth in their bodies, the sacrifice of their remaining strength, and for some, the ultimate sacrifice given for a brother they have never met. There is a profound, tragic beauty in this devotion. These men are giving everything they have, not for land or for glory, but for the simple, human need to reach out and pull a friend from the dark. In the middle of the struggle, a soldier falls. He doesn't cry out. He simply sinks into the soft, white powder, his strength finally spent. Before he can be lost to the cold, two of his comrades drop their gear and crawl to him. They don't think about the danger or the mission. They only think of the boy in the snow. They wrap their arms around him, pulling him back behind the safety of a stone wall, sharing their own meager warmth to bring him back. They stay with him in the shadows, whispering quiet words of encouragement until his eyes clear and his breath returns to a steady rhythm. This is the everyday heroism of the village. It is not found in the headlines, but in the small acts of kindness performed in the face of overwhelming cold. It is the shared crust of bread passed between three hungry men. It is the dry pair of socks given to the boy whose feet have turned to wood. It is the hand held in the dark of a cellar while the world roars outside. As the afternoon light begins to fade, turning the snow to a bruised, dusty purple, Elias finally reaches the village square. He stands in the shadow of the ancient stone church, his chest heaving, his lungs burning with the freezing air. He looks back down the long, winding lane he has just traveled. He sees the footprints in the snow, the deep grooves left by the tires, and the dark shapes of his friends moving steadily forward. The stones of the village are still silent, but the weight they held seems lighter now. The shadows have been pushed back. The path is open. Elias reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It is a letter he started days ago, a letter he hasn't been able to finish. He leans against the cold stone of the church and writes just 3 words on the bottom of the page, 1 mile closer. He folds the paper and tucks it away, a tiny flame of hope burning in his chest. He knows that the hardest miles may still lie ahead. He knows that the night will be long and the frost will be deep. But he also knows that the silent stones did not stop them. They pushed through the fear, they held onto each other, and they gained the ground they needed. The column begins to move again, leaving the village behind as they head back into the dark embrace of the pines. The engines rumble a low, mechanical lullaby, and the boots continue their rhythmic crunch on the ice. Behind them, the nameless village settles back into its winter slumber. The gates stop swinging. The shadows return to the doorways. But the stones now hold a new memory, the memory of 1,000 young men who walked through the ice and the fire, carrying the light of their brothers in their hands. As the stars begin to emerge, cold and distant in the velvet sky, the men of the vanguard settle into their new positions. They wrap themselves in their blankets and lean against the frozen earth. They are exhausted beyond measure, their bodies aching and their spirits frayed. But as they close their eyes, they feel the pull of the circle growing stronger. They can almost hear the whispered thanks of the men in the cellars of Bastogne. They have done the impossible. They have pushed through the silence, and they are coming. The village of silent stones disappears into the mist, a quiet monument to the resilience of the human soul. The snow begins to fall again, soft and gentle, covering the scars of the day and smoothing the road for the miles yet to come. The world is still, and for tonight, that is enough. They are 1 mile closer, and the dream of home is just a little brighter in the dark. The world outside was a wall of blinding white, but inside the steel heart, 5 men breathed as one. There is a strange, heavy peace to be found within the belly of a tank. It is a world made entirely of iron, grease, and the low, constant thrum of a laboring engine. While the Ardennes Forest is wide and vast, stretching out in endless waves of frozen timber, the universe for these 5 men has shrunk to a space no larger than a small kitchen pantry. Here, in the dim, amber light of the instrument panels, the air is thick with the scent of diesel fuel, old coffee, and the damp wool of 5 heavy coats. Outside, the blizzard has erased the horizon. The snow does not just fall, it swirls in violent, dizzying patterns, turning the world into a featureless void of white. But inside the Sherman, there is a different kind of reality. It is a place of hard edges and cold metal, yet it is also a place of profound, unspoken intimacy. Imagine the driver, tucked low in his seat at the front of the hull. His world is a narrow slit of glass, barely 2 inches wide. Through that tiny window, he peers into the chaos of the storm. He cannot see the road has long since been buried under 3 feet of drifting powder. He drives by feel, sensing the tilt of the heavy machine as it climbs over hidden ridges, feeling the tracks bite into the frozen earth beneath the snow. His hands, wrapped in thick, oil-stained gloves, grip the steering levers with a steady, quiet resolve. He is not just steering a machine, he is carrying the lives of his brothers through the mouth of a winter ghost. Beside him, the bow gunner sits in the shadows. He is young, perhaps 19, with a face that still holds the softness of home beneath a layer of soot and sweat. He is not looking for targets, the snow is too thick for that. Instead, he is listening. He listens to the rhythmic clatter of the treads, the high-pitched whine of the transmission, and the steady breathing of the driver. In the cramped darkness, he reaches out a hand and rests it lightly on the driver's shoulder. It is a simple touch, a quiet anchor in the whiteout. It says, without words, I am here. I am watching the dark for you. The weight of the armor is more than just the tons of steel that protect them. It is the weight of the mission, the heavy, invisible pull of the men waiting for them in the north. Every time the engine groans as it pushes through a particularly deep drift, the crew feels that weight in their own chests. They are the tip of the spear, the heavy iron hand reaching out to break the circle of winter. In the turret, the space is even tighter. The commander stands with his head just below the hatch, his eyes fixed on the periscope. He is the navigator of this steel island. He speaks into his headset in a low, calm whisper, his voice a steadying hum in the ears of the driver below. Easy now, Jack, he murmurs. Keep her steady. Just follow the ghosts of the trees. We're getting there. 1 yard at a time. There is no sense of speed inside the tank. Time loses its meaning when you are moving through a blizzard. Minutes stretch into hours, and hours dissolve into a long, continuous dream of vibration and gray light. To pass the time, to keep the creeping claustrophobia at bay, they tell stories. They don't talk about the war or the maps. They talk about the things that are waiting for them on the other side of the snow. The loader, a tall man from the plains who has to keep his head bowed to avoid the low ceiling, reaches into a small metal bin and pulls out a dented tin of crackers. He breaks one in half and hands a piece to the gunner sitting below him. My grandmother used to make these little lemon cakes, the loader whispers, his voice barely audible over the rumble of the engine. Every Sunday. She'd put them in a tin just like this one. If you closed your eyes, the whole house smelled like sunshine and sugar. I can still smell it sometimes, even in here. The gunner takes the cracker, the dry crunch sounding loud in the small space. He closes his eyes and tries to find the scent of lemon in the thick, oily air. For a moment, the steel walls of the tank seem to melt away. He isn't in a freezing iron box in the middle of a forest. He is sitting at a wooden table in a sun-drenched kitchen, watching his grandmother pull a tray from the oven. "Sunshine and sugar," the gunner repeats softly. "That sounds like a good thing to remember, Bill." "Thank you." They share these small, golden fragments of their past, weaving a tapestry of memory that protects them better than any armor plate. They are 5 separate lives, bound together by the same rhythm of the engine and the same shared fear of the dark. They know the sound of each other's coughs. They know the way each man sighs when he thinks no one is listening. They have become a single organism, a collective soul housed in a body of steel. The cold is a constant, creeping presence. Despite the heat of the engine, the metal walls of the tank are like blocks of ice. The condensation from their breath freezes on the bulkheads, forming delicate, crystalline patterns that shimmer in the dim light. They huddle together, shifting their weight to share whatever warmth they can find. When the tank hits a particularly deep snowdrift, the engine roars in a high, straining protest. The treads spin, throwing up great plumes of white powder that coat the periscopes. The machine slows, lurching to a halt in the middle of the whiteout. For a moment, a terrible silence falls over the crew. The only sound is the heavy, ragged breathing of 5 men and the clicking of the cooling metal. In that silence, the private fears they usually keep tucked away begin to rise. What if the tracks break? What if the fuel runs out? What if they are alone in the white, and no one ever finds them? The commander feels the tension rising in the turret. He reaches down and taps the side of the radio, a familiar, metallic sound that breaks the spell. "She's just catching her breath, boys," he says, his voice as gentle as a bedtime story. "Give her a second. She's a stubborn old girl. She wants to see Bastogne just as much as we do." He reaches into a small pocket on his jacket and pulls out a lucky charm, a smooth, blue marble his little sister gave him before he boarded the ship. He rolls it between his fingers, feeling its coolness, its perfection. He imagines her standing on their front porch, looking at the moon and wondering where he is. "All right, Jack," the commander says softly into the mic. "Try her again. Easy on the clutch. Just a gentle nudge." The driver exhales, a long, white cloud of breath. He finesses the levers, his touch as delicate as a surgeon's. The engine coughs, rumbles, and then finds its voice again. With a slow, grinding heave, the tank lurches forward, the treads finally biting into the hidden earth. They are moving again. The fear recedes, pushed back into the shadows by the renewed vibration of the floorboards. This is the quiet resilience of the armor. It is not about the strength of the steel, but the strength of the men who live within it. They are tired, they are cold, and they are moving through a world that has turned its back on them. But they have each other. They have the lemon cakes, the blue marble, and the steady, whispered guidance of their commander. Inside the Sherman, every small act is magnified. The way the loader reaches over to tighten the scarf around the gunner's neck. The way the driver shares his last sip of lukewarm water with the bow gunner. These are not grand gestures, but in the freezing dark of the whiteout, they are the very definition of grace. As the night deepens, the blizzard begins to settle into a steady, rhythmic fall. The wind dies down, and the whiteout softens into a silver mist. The commander dares to open the hatch just an inch, letting a sliver of the freezing night air into the turret. He looks out over the landscape. The forest is a study in monochromatic beauty, white snow, black trees, and a pale, gray sky. Far off in the distance, he sees a faint, orange glow on the horizon. It is the town. It is the circle. He closes the hatch and leans his head against the cold metal. "I see the light, boys," he whispers, and his voice carries a tremor of pure, unadulterated relief. "We're close. We're so very close." The news travels through the tank like a warm current. The driver sits up a little straighter. The loader begins to hum a low, wordless tune. The weight of the armor suddenly feels lighter, as if the steel itself is eager to finish the journey. They continue to roll through the deep snow, the engine purring like a giant cat. They are 5 men in a box, but they are no longer isolated. They are connected to the lights on the horizon, to the mothers on the porches, and to the brothers waiting in the cellars. They are the weight of the armor, and they are carrying the hope of the world into the dawn. The tank moves on, a slow, dark shadow in a silver forest, leaving a deep, dual trail in the snow, a path of iron, and a path of heart. They are almost there. They can feel the warmth of the handshake already. And in the quiet, thrumming dark of the turret, they finally allow themselves to believe in the morning. The distance between two hearts is sometimes measured not in miles, but in the final, shivering breaths of a long winter's night. We have come so far through the white silence, through the frozen pines and the valleys where the fog sleeps like a heavy secret. But now, the air has changed. It carries a different scent, not just the crisp, sharp bite of the snow or the resin of the trees, but the faint, acrid ghost of wood smoke in the distant, low thrum of a world under siege. We are standing on the threshold. We are in the final mile. Imagine, if you will, the men of the relief column as they move through this last stretch of frozen earth. They are no longer the same men who began this journey. They have become something elemental, something carved from the ice itself. Their faces are weathered into masks of silver frost, their eyes are wide and hollow, reflecting a sky that has forgotten the color of the sun. They move with a slow, rhythmic grace that belongs only to the truly exhausted, a state of being where the mind has gone quiet, and the body moves only because the spirit refuses to let it fall. This is the place where the line between fatigue and determination begins to blur. It is a soft, hazy borderland. Every step feels like a victory over gravity. Every breath is a conscious effort, a tiny flame of warmth kept alive in a cathedral of ice. To look at them is to see the very definition of quiet resilience. They do not shout. They do not hurry. They simply persist, like the steady, slow turning of the earth. In the cab of a lead truck, a young man named Silas grips the steering wheel. His hands are so cold they feel like they belong to someone else, strange tools of bone and leather. He hasn't slept in 3 days, not real sleep, anyway. He has lived in a twilight world of shifting shadows and the red glow of taillights. To stay awake, he doesn't think about the war. He doesn't think about the maps. He thinks about the way the light used to hit the creek behind his house in late August, the water moving like liquid gold over the smooth, round stones. He focuses on that warmth, that light, using it as a compass to guide him through the blinding white of the Ardennes. Beside him, his companion has drifted into that shallow, restless slumber that comes when the body can no longer sustain the weight of the world. Silas doesn't wake him. He watches the rhythmic rise and fall of the man's chest, a tiny, fragile miracle in the middle of a wasteland. He feels a profound, protective love for his friend, a bond forged in the shared silence of 1,000 miles. He whispers a soft, wordless promise to the frosted windshield, just a little further. I'll get us there. Outside the trucks, the infantrymen walk in the deep ruts left by the tires. The snow here is thick and heavy, pulling at their boots like a living thing. They walk with their heads bowed, their chins tucked deep into the wool of their coats. They have entered a trance-like state. The world has narrowed down to the patch of white directly in front of them and the rhythmic, hushing sound of their own footsteps. Left, right. Breathe. Left, right. Breathe. In this final mile, the knowledge of the men inside Bastogne has become a physical weight. It is no longer an abstract idea of a trapped army, it is the thought of individuals. They think of the boys they know who are in that circle, the ones who liked to play harmonica, the ones who talked about their dogs, the ones who shared their last letter from home. They know that inside that town, the candles are burning low. They know the bandages are thin and the food is gone. They can feel the ticking of an invisible clock in the very marrow of their bones. It is a quiet, heart-wrenching urgency that pushes them forward when their muscles scream for rest. There is a soldier named Arthur walking near the rear of the line. He is older than the others, his movements more deliberate. He carries a small, silver locket in his pocket, not with a picture, but with a tiny, dried flower from his wife's garden. Every few minutes, he reaches in and touches the cool metal. It is his tether. It reminds him that there is a world beyond this final mile, a world where things grow and the air is soft. As he walks, he notices a younger boy stumbling in the drift beside him. The boy is crying, though the tears are silent, freezing before they can even reach his cheeks. Without a word, Arthur reaches out a heavy, gloved hand and rests it on the boy's shoulder. He doesn't offer a speech. He doesn't tell him to be brave. He simply walks beside him, letting his own steady rhythm act as a guide. He shares his strength through the simple contact of wool on wool. And slowly, the boy's steps find their mark again. They move together, two small shadows against the vast, and different white. The landscape in this final mile is haunted by the ghosts of the battle. The trees are splintered, their white bones exposed to the biting wind. Abandoned gear sits half buried in the drifts, looking like the ruins of a forgotten civilization. But the men do not look at the destruction. They look at the horizon. And then, through a sudden clearing in the mist, they see it. The town of Bastogne. It appears not as a grand city, but as a cluster of dark, jagged shapes against the gray sky. Thin ribbons of smoke rise from the ruins, drifting lazily upward like prayers. It looks so small, so fragile, huddled there in the center of the White Sea. The sight of it sends a jarring shock of emotion through the column. It is no longer a name on a map. It is a destination. It is home. The exhaustion doesn't vanish, it is too deep for that, but it changes. It becomes a quiet, focused energy. The blurred line between the body's limits and the heart's will finally disappears. There is no more fatigue. There is only the drive. They are the water breaking against the dam. They are the light returning to a dark room. Imagine the feeling of knowing you are minutes away from saving a life. It is a holy, terrifying sensation. The men in the relief column begin to move with a renewed, hushed intensity. The engines of the tanks and trucks seem to find a smoother, deeper purr, as if the machines themselves understand the gravity of the moment. The soldiers on foot stand a little taller, their eyes fixed on the distant roofs. They think of the handshake that is waiting for them. They think of the look in the eyes of the men who have been holding the line in the dark. That thought is the ultimate fuel. It is more powerful than any ration, warmer than any fire. It is the pure, distilled essence of human brotherhood. A soldier reaches into his pack and pulls out a small, crushed bar of chocolate he has been saving since the coast. He doesn't eat it. He breaks it into several small pieces and hands them to the men nearest him. They take the chocolate with a nod of silent thanks, letting the sweetness melt on their tongues. It is a tiny, beautiful ritual of communion before the final push. They are preparing themselves, body and soul, to step out of the shadows and into the light of the rescue. The snow begins to fall again, but it is a gentle, dusting snow, like powdered sugar. It settles on their helmets and their shoulders, a soft white mantle of grace. The wind dies down, leaving the final mile in a state of profound, expectant silence. The only sound is the heartbeat of the army, moving steadily, unstoppably toward the perimeter. They are so close now that they can see the individual stones of the houses. They can see the dark shapes of the defenders in their foxholes, looking out toward them with disbelief and dawning hope. The two groups of men, the rescuers and the rescued, are like two hands reaching out through the dark, their fingertips just inches apart. The final mile is almost over. The long, agonizing march through the winter of the soul is coming to its end. The men of the relief column take one last, deep breath of the freezing air. They adjust their gear. They look at the man to their left and the man to their right. They share one final, knowing look, a look that says we made it. And then, they move forward. They are no longer a column of exhausted soldiers, they are a wave of relief, a tide of humanity flowing into the town. The final mile is behind them, left in the snow as a testament to what the heart can do when the body says no more. They are crossing the threshold. They are bringing the morning to a place that has known only night. The silver light of the Ardennes fades into the warm, smoky shadows of the town. The silence of the forest is replaced by the soft, emotional murmurs of a meeting that will be remembered forever. They have arrived. The circle is broken. And in the quiet, snowy streets of Bastogne, the weight of the world finally begins to lift. In the end, it was not the roar of a cannon that broke the winter, but the soft touch of one hand reaching for another. The late afternoon sun of December 26th hung low over the Ardennes, a pale, flickering amber coin struggling to stay afloat in a sea of bruised purple clouds. Across the rolling hills and the shattered, splintered remains of the pine forests, a strange and heavy stillness had begun to settle. The snow, which had been a violent, swirling enemy for so long, was now falling in large, lazy flakes, delicate white stars that drifted down to kiss the frozen earth with a soundless grace. On the southern edge of the town of Bastogne, near a small patch of woods that had seen too much sorrow, a young man stood in a foxhole. His name was Daniel. He was a paratrooper, one of the many who had been holding the circle against the dark for what felt like 100 years. His uniform was a map of the siege, torn at the elbows, stiff with the gray mud of the cellars, and dusted with a fine layer of crystalline frost. His eyes, once bright with the untroubled light of a farm boy from Iowa, were now hollowed out, etched with a weariness that went deeper than his bones. He was so cold that he had stopped shivering long ago, his body had simply accepted the ice as a permanent part of his soul. Daniel leaned his chin against the frozen rim of his trench, staring out into the mist. He had spent the morning listening to the distant, rhythmic thud of the horizon, a sound he had learned to treat with a cautious, quiet hope. For days, the air had been filled with the ghosts of rumors, whispers that their brothers were coming, that the roads were opening, that the sky was no longer a lid on a coffin. But Daniel had learned to trust only the silence and the man standing in the hole next to him. Then, he saw it. It did not look like an army at first. Out of the shifting white veil of the fog, a dark shape began to emerge. It was slow, heavy, and moved with a rhythmic, mechanical lumber. At first, Daniel thought his mind was playing the cruelest of winter tricks, conjuring the image of a savior out of the shadows of the pines. He blinked, rubbing his stinging eyes with the back of a tattered wool glove. He looked again. The shape grew clearer. It was the blunt, iron nose of a tank, its olive drab paint scarred and hidden beneath a thick coat of frozen slush. Behind it, other shapes followed, dark silhouettes of men walking with their heads bowed against the wind, their boots creating a new, purposeful path through the untouched drifts. They were not moving with the frantic energy of a charge, they were moving with the heavy, exhausted determination of men who had walked across the world to be right here, in this specific patch of snow. In the foxhole next to Daniel, an older sergeant named Miller slowly rose to his feet. He didn't say a word. He simply watched the column approach, his breath hitching in his chest, forming a small, trembling cloud in the air. The two groups of men, the ones inside the circle and the ones who had broken it, were now only a few hundred yards apart. A profound, sacred silence fell over the woods. It was as if the forest itself had decided to hold its breath. The distant rumbles died away, and the wind settled into a soft, hushing sigh. There were no cheers. There were no triumphant shouts. The emotion of the moment was too heavy for noise, it was a weight that could only be carried in silence. A single tank, its engine purring with a low, soothing vibration, lurched to a halt just outside the perimeter. The hatch on the top creaked open, and a man climbed out. He was a tanker, his face smeared with grease and soot, his eyes red from days of staring through a periscope into a whiteout. He jumped down into the deep powder, his heavy boots making a soft, muffled thud as he hit the ground. Daniel climbed out of his foxhole. His legs felt like heavy wooden pillars, stiff and uncooperative, but he forced them to move. He walked toward the stranger. Every step was a struggle against the gravity of his own exhaustion. He watched the tanker walking toward him, and in that moment, the entire history of the drive, the thousands of miles of frozen roads, the sleepless nights in the map rooms, the rhythmic crunch of boots on the ice, all of it condensed into the narrowing space between them. They met in the middle of a small, snow-covered clearing. The tanker stopped. He looked at Daniel, at the thinness of his face, the way his coat was held together with a bit of stray wire, the quiet strength that radiated from his tired frame. Daniel looked at the tanker, at the oil on his hands, the warmth still radiating from the massive steel machine behind him, the look of profound, aching relief in his eyes. Without a word, the tanker reached out his hand. He wasn't wearing a glove. His palm was rough, calloused, and stained with the work of the road. Daniel reached out his own hand, his fingers trembling slightly as he pulled back his tattered wool mitt. The two hands met in the center of the winter. It was a simple, firm grip. Skin pressed against skin. In that touch, the isolation of the siege was finally, irrevocably shattered. The handshake was a bridge built over a week of darkness. It was a promise kept. It was the physical manifestation of the word brotherhood. Daniel felt the warmth of the tanker's hand seeping into his own frozen palm, a tiny, electric current of life that seemed to jumpstart his heart. He felt the solidness of the man, the reality of him. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a story told in the dark of a cellar. The world had come back for them. The tanker squeezed Daniel's hand, his voice a low, raspy whisper when he finally found the words. "Good to see you, son," the tanker said. "We've been looking for you." Daniel tried to speak, but his throat was tight, filled with a sudden, overwhelming surge of emotion that made his eyes sting. He didn't cry, but he allowed himself a single, deep exhale, a breath he felt he had been holding since the fog first rolled in 10 days ago. He looked at the man and simply nodded, a slow, solemn movement of the head that said more than 1,000 speeches. "We knew you were coming," Daniel managed to whisper back. "We stayed right here." They stood there for a long time, their hands still joined, two small figures in a vast, white landscape. Around them, other men were beginning to meet. You could see them all across the line, shadowy figures stepping out of the earth to greet the men who had come from the south. There were no grand ceremonies. Instead, there were small, deeply moving exchanges. A rescuer reaching into his pocket and handing a real, uncrushed bar of chocolate to a shivering boy. A paratrooper leaning his head against the cold steel of a tank, just to feel the vibration of an engine that meant he was no longer alone. A sergeant from the relief column pulling a folded, dry letter from his coat, a piece of mail that had been sitting in a sack for a week, and handing it to a man whose eyes filled with light at the sight of his wife's handwriting. These were the true climaxes of the breakthrough. Not the maps being redrawn or the flags being raised, but the shared cigarette between two strangers who were now friends forever. It was the way a soldier from the relief column took off his own dry scarf and wrapped it around the neck of a defender, a silent act of grace that transcended the war. As the dusk began to deepen into a soft, charcoal night, the lights of Bastogne seemed to glow a little brighter. The wood smoke from the chimneys no longer felt like the scent of a trap, but like the warmth of a home being restored. The engines of the relief column continued to hum, a steady, mechanical lullaby that told the town it could finally, safely sleep. Daniel and the tanker finally let go of each other's hands. They didn't walk away immediately. They stood shoulder to shoulder, looking back toward the town and then out toward the dark woods. The circle was broken, but the bond remained. They had shared the most profound moment a human being can experience, the moment when the darkness is pushed back by the simple, stubborn presence of another. The tanker reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, dented tin. He opened it to reveal a few pieces of hard candy, the kind that tastes of artificial cherry and home. He took one and handed the rest to Daniel. "Happy late Christmas," the tanker murmured, his eyes crinkling in a weary smile. Daniel took a piece of the candy, putting it in his mouth. The sweetness was startling, a burst of summer flavor in the middle of a graveyard of ice. He looked up at the first few stars beginning to peek through the clearing clouds. They looked different tonight. They didn't look like cold, distant sparks. They looked like the lights of a distant shore, welcoming them back to the world of the living. "Happy Christmas," Daniel whispered back. The two men stood in the snow, the taste of cherry on their tongues and the warmth of the handshake still lingering in their palms. The long march was over. The siege was a memory. The winter was still deep, and the road ahead would still be hard, but for tonight, the darkness had lost. Two hands had met in the snow, and in that quiet, exhausted contact, the world had been made whole again. The snow continued to fall, a gentle white blanket covering the tracks of the tanks and the footprints of the men, smoothing over the scars of the woods. The forest returned to its peaceful slumber, lulled by the rhythmic breathing of thousands of men who were no longer alone. The breakthrough was complete, not with a shout, but with a whisper of grace in the heart of the frost. The world did not wake with a roar of victory, but with the quiet, silver sigh of a winter that had finally decided to be kind. As the sun began its slow, cautious climb over the ridges of the Ardennes on the morning after the breakthrough, the light it cast was different. It was no longer the bruised, heavy light of the siege, nor the sharp, mocking brilliance of the clearing sky. It was a soft, pearlescent glow that seemed to move tenderly over the landscape, as if the heavens themselves were trying not to disturb the exhausted men who lay scattered across the white earth. In the town of Bastogne, a strange and beautiful silence had taken hold. It was a silence so profound that the men found themselves speaking in hushed tones, as if loud voices might shatter the fragile peace that had finally descended. The constant, rhythmic thrum of the artillery had vanished, leaving behind an emptiness that felt both surreal and holy. For the first time in many days, the sound of the wind was just the sound of the wind, and the snap of a frozen branch was just a branch, and not the prelude to a storm of iron. Imagine the men in the foxholes at the perimeter. They do not jump up and cheer. They do not wave their helmets in the air. Instead, they sit very still. They look at the man in the hole beside them, seeing the same reflection of survival in eyes that are rimmed with the red dust of fatigue. They see the grime on each other's faces, the black soot from the small fires, the gray ash of the ruins, and the salt of 1,000 frozen breaths. And then, as the realization begins to sink in, the tears come. They are not the hot, jagged tears of grief. They are quiet, heavy tears that move slowly through the dirt on their cheeks, freezing into tiny, glinting crystals before they can reach the collars of their coats. A soldier named Sam reaches up with a stiff, numb finger and touches a frozen drop on his chin. He looks at it with a mix of wonder and disbelief. He is alive. The circle has been broken. The road back to the world is open. He doesn't say a word, he simply leans his head back against the frozen earth and lets the morning sun warm his closed eyelids. It is the first time he has felt truly warm in an eternity. Down in the dark, vaulted cellars of the town, the thaw of relief is moving through the hospital and the ruins. The candles are still flickering, but they are no longer the only light. A pale, dusty beam of morning sunshine stretches down the stone stairs, reaching into the gloom like a golden hand. The evacuation is beginning. It is a slow, methodical, and incredibly gentle process. Imagine the stretcher bearers. They move with a grace that is almost a dance, stepping carefully over the rubble, their eyes fixed on the path ahead. They carry the wounded boys out of the damp shadows and into the fresh, cold air. As each stretcher emerges from the dark doorway of the cathedral or the bakery, the soldier lying upon it does the same thing. He squints against the light, and then he takes a long, deep breath. It smells like just air, one boy whispers as he is carried toward a waiting ambulance. He is wrapped in a thick, clean blanket that smells of soap and the world outside. He looks up at the sky, his eyes tracking the soft, white clouds. He isn't thinking about his wound or the pain. He is thinking about how blue the world is. He is thinking about the fact that he is moving south, away from the ice, away from the shadows. A medic walks beside the stretcher, keeping a steady, comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. "We're going home, Leo," the medic murmurs, his voice a low, soothing lullaby. "Just keep breathing the fresh air. We're going to a place with real beds and warm milk. You did it. You held the line." The boy closes his eyes, a faint, beautiful smile touching his lips. He lets the rocking motion of the stretcher lull him into a peaceful, dreamless sleep. He is safe. Along the streets of the town, the people of Bastogne are emerging from their own hiding places. They come out slowly, like flowers peering through the snow after a long winter. They see the young men in the olive-drab coats, the men who stayed when the world turned dark. The Belgian grandmother from the stone cellar stands on her doorstep, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She sees a soldier she tended to just 2 nights ago, a boy who had been lost in a fever. He is walking now, leaning on a friend, heading toward a transport truck. She doesn't shout a greeting. She simply walks to the edge of the cobblestones and reaches out. As the boy passes, she presses a small, hard crust of bread into his hand. It is all she has left. The boy stops, looks into her lined, silver-framed face, and nods. No words are exchanged, for there are no words in any language that can describe the depth of the gratitude passing between them. He touches his helmet in a quiet salute, and she watches him go, her eyes wet with the same frozen tears that mark the faces of the soldiers. There is a surreal quality to this morning. The machines of war are still there, the tanks with their scarred armor, the trucks with their rattling engines, but they seem quieter now, as if the steel itself is exhaling. The relief column has brought more than just food and medicine, they have brought the atmosphere of the future. They have brought the promise that there will be a tomorrow, and a day after that. A group of soldiers from the 101st sits on a fallen stone wall near the town square. They are sharing a large, steaming pot of coffee brought to them by a driver from Patton's army. The steam rises in a thick, fragrant plume, smelling of distant kitchens and quiet mornings. They pass a single tin mug around the circle, each man taking a slow, reverent sip. They don't talk about the breakthrough. They talk about what they want to do when they get their first hot bath. They talk about the taste of a fresh apple. They talk about the letters they are going to write tonight, letters that will finally say, "I am safe. The worst is over. I am coming back to you." One soldier, a young man from the mountains of North Carolina, pulls a small, crumpled photograph from his pocket. It is a picture of his wife standing in a garden of sunflowers. He has looked at this picture every day of the siege, but today, he looks at it differently. He doesn't look at it with the desperate longing of a man who might never see her again. He looks at it with the quiet, steady certainty of a man who is already on his way home. He brushes a speck of dirt from the corner of the image and kisses it softly before tucking it back into his pocket, right over his heart. The thaw of relief is not a sudden melting of the snow. The Ardennes is still a frozen world, and the wind still carries the sharp edge of the frost. But the ice inside the men is beginning to break. The hollow, guarded look in their eyes is softening. They are beginning to remember how to be human again, how to laugh softly at a whispered joke, how to notice the beauty of the sunlight on the pine needles. As the afternoon light begins to fade, casting long, violet shadows across the town, the first large convoys of the wounded and the exhausted begin to roll out of Bastogne. The trucks move slowly, their tires crunching rhythmically in the slush. Inside the canvas covers, the men sit shoulder to shoulder. They are incredibly quiet. They watch the ruined houses and the splintered trees of the town recede into the distance. They are leaving the circle of winter behind. They look at the men who are staying to hold the new line, the fresh troops who have come to relieve them. There is a silent passing of the guard, a heavy, respectful acknowledgement of the work that was done. The men in the trucks don't feel like heroes, they feel like children who have finally been allowed to go to sleep after a very long, very dark night. In a quiet corner of the forest, Just outside the town, a lone medic stands by the side of the road, watching the trucks pass. He is holding a small, wooden cross he carved from a piece of fallen pine. He waits for a break in the traffic, and then he walks into a small clearing where the snow is still white and undisturbed. He kneels, and with his bare hands, he clears a small patch of earth. He places the cross there, a simple, quiet monument to the friends who will not be riding in the trucks today. He stays there for a moment, his head bowed, the silence of the woods wrapping around him like a heavy blanket. He is not mourning with a loud voice. He is offering a quiet, whispered thanks to the shadows. He realizes that the price of this relief was high, and he carries the weight of that knowledge with a solemn, beautiful dignity. When he finally stands, he wipes his eyes with his sleeve, leaving a fresh streak of clean skin on his dirty face. He turns and walks back toward the road, toward the light, toward the future. The sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and deep, velvet blue. The stars begin to emerge, looking down on a town that is no longer a target, but a sanctuary. The fires in the ruins are being tended not for survival, but for comfort. The breathing of the army has settled into a steady, peaceful rhythm. The thaw of relief is complete. The siege of Bastogne has passed from a living nightmare into the hallowed halls of memory. The men close their eyes, wrapped in their clean blankets, lulled by the soft, distant hum of the world returning to order. They are cold, they are scarred, and they are tired beyond words. But as they drift into sleep, they know that the morning will bring the sun, and the sun will bring the road, and the road will eventually lead them all the way home. The winter remains, but the heart is warm. The forest has a long memory, but it speaks only in whispers. If you were to walk through the Ardennes today, in the soft, dappled light of a summer afternoon or the hushed, silver breath of a winter morning, you would find a world that has returned to a state of profound and gentle peace. The pine trees, tall and ancient, stand like silent sentinels over hills that have forgotten the sound of iron. The air is clear and sweet, carrying the scent of damp earth, wild moss, and the slow, rhythmic sigh of the wind moving through the high branches. Nature is a patient healer. Over the decades, the deep, jagged wounds left by the war have been tenderly mended by the forest. The craters where the earth was once torn open are now soft, grassy bowls where deer come to graze in the twilight. The splintered trunks of the trees have been replaced by new growth, reaching upward toward the same sun that once hid behind the heavy, gray clouds of 1944. But if you look closely, if you step off the beaten paths and walk deep into the emerald shadows of the woods, you can still see the traces of the men who were once here. There, beneath a carpet of thick, green moss and fallen needles, are the foxholes. They are no longer sharp or cold. Time and the falling leaves have softened their edges, turning them into gentle indentations in the forest floor. They look like cradles now, small hollows where the earth has gathered the memories of the boys who once huddled there for warmth. To stand beside one of these silent circles is to feel a sudden, quiet reverence. You realize that this small patch of ground was once a young man's entire universe. It was the place where he wrote his last letter, where he shared his last piece of chocolate, and where he looked up at the stars and wondered if he would ever see his mother's porch again. The ghosts of the winter are not frightening presences. They are echoes of a resilience that is almost too beautiful for words. Think of the Bois de la Paix, the woods of peace, just outside of Bastogne. Here, rows of trees have been planted in the shape of a great bird, a symbol of a world that finally found its breath. Each tree is dedicated to a veteran, a living monument that grows taller with every passing year. If you sit quietly among these trees, you can almost hear the soft, rhythmic crunch of boots on the ice, not as a sound of war, but as a lullaby of movement. You can feel the weight of the armor, but it no longer feels heavy. It feels like the steady, protective pulse of a heart that refused to stop beating. The legacy of Patton's drive is not found in the maps or the tactical diagrams. It is found in the quiet, enduring gratitude of a town that has never forgotten the sound of a handshake in the snow. In the streets of Bastogne today, the children walk to school past stone walls that still bear the faint scars of the siege. They do not look at these marks with fear. They look at them with a deep, inherited sense of peace. They know that their grandparents were once cold and hungry, trapped in the dark cellars beneath their feet. And they know that out of the whiteout, out of the impossible storm, a line of tired men walked across the world to bring them the morning. The stories of those men have become part of the very stones of the town. They are told in the hushed voices of parents putting their children to bed, a modern-day fairy tale about a circle of winter that was broken by a circle of brothers. The Nuts reply is no longer a boast, it is a family motto, a reminder that even when the sky is gray and the roads are closed, the human spirit can remain stubbornly, beautifully unyielding. Imagine an old man sitting in a sun-drenched living room in a small town in America. He is 90 now, and his hands, once stained with oil and grease from the belly of a tank, are thin and spotted with age. He reaches into a wooden box on the table beside him and pulls out a yellowed piece of paper. It is the letter he wrote by candlelight in the Ardennes, the one he never mailed because he brought it home in his pocket instead. He traces the faded pencil lines with a trembling finger. He remembers the smell of the damp wool. He remembers the way the stars looked through the branches of the pines. But mostly, he remembers the men. He remembers the medic who held his hand in the dark. He remembers the driver who kept the engine humming when the world was made of ice. He remembers the handshake in the clearing. A soft, peaceful smile touches his lips. He is no longer the frightened boy in the foxhole. He is the keeper of the flame. He realizes that his journey through the snow was not just a march toward a town on a map, it was a journey toward the very best part of being human. He gave his strength to a stranger, and in return, he found a family that would last forever. He closes the box and looks out his window at the green grass of his own backyard. The winter is far away now. The frost has long since melted. But the echoes of the pines stay with him, a gentle, comforting hum in the back of his mind. As the evening settles over the Ardennes today, the shadows of the trees stretch long and blue across the snow, for the snow still falls here, soft and secret, just as it always has. But the darkness is no longer a prison. The lights of Bastogne glow warmly in the valley, reflecting off the frosted slate roofs like 1,000 tiny stars. The wind no longer howls with a message of isolation, it whispers a message of eternal thanks. We owe a debt to the ghosts of winter. Not a debt of sorrow, but a debt of light. They taught us that no mile is too long when you are walking toward a brother. They taught us that a single candle can hold back the darkness of a cathedral. They taught us that when the world turns to ice, the only way to survive is to lean on one another, sharing our breath and our memories until the sun returns. So, let us visit the forest one last time in our minds. Let us walk softly through the high pines, past the mossy foxholes and the silent stones of the villages. Let us stand in the clearing where the two hands met and feel the lingering warmth of that contact. Let us listen to the silence of the Ardennes, a silence that is no longer empty, but filled with the quiet, rhythmic breathing of a history that has found its rest. The men of the drive have mostly gone now, following the road into the final, golden sunset. But they have left their footprints in our hearts. They have left a trail of grace through the snow, a path for us to follow whenever our own lives feel cold and surrounded. They are the echoes in the pines, the steady pulse of resilience that reminds us that we are never truly alone in the dark. Sleep now, and let the image of the forest wrap around you like a heavy, wool blanket. Feel the peace of the quiet town, the warmth of the distant fires, and the gentle, protective watch of the ancient trees. The winter was long, and the march was hard, but the morning has come. The circle is open. The world is wide and full of light. And in the deep, hallowed silence of the Ardennes, the ghosts of the winter are finally, peacefully, at home. The snow falls softly. The stars watch over the pines. And the story of the drive to Bastogne settles into the earth, a timeless lullaby of hope, whispering through the branches, forever and ever, until the next spring begins.